I had a secret. I found a secret that I wanted to tell the world about. I just reversed all of these things which I told that I was going to have for the rest of my life, and I wanted to tell the world about it. Nobody's going to listen to a grown man that looks like a little boy, so I began training.
12 months, you lost 107 pounds,
7.5 stone.
You came off your meds, your migraines disappeared, and your body composition would have basically gone as close as you've ever been to normal.
Yeah, I'm small, but I look fit, so I decided to enter a men's physique bodybuilding competition. I competed, and I came second, and I came off stage, and I was buzzing.
And you were still keto at this point?
Yes, yeah, still keto. I was consistently keto, way more than I ever, fell off the wagon. If you want to be healthy, there's 3 things you need to remember, 3 words.
Welcome to the Dr. Abs podcast, and today I have a man of many talents as my guest. His name is Richard Smith. He's done a lot of things in his life, including, very importantly, becoming a European bodybuilding champion as someone who has switched to the carnivore lifestyle. As well as that, he's an absolute expert on biochemistry and he can handle all your questions. So I'm going to talk to him today about his career as a bodybuilder, about what he's doing now in the world of biochemistry, and his supplements as well that he manufactures. Richard, thank you very much for joining me today.
Dr. Abs, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You're welcome.
I've been looking forward to this since you invited me on. Yeah, super excited.
So am I. I think there's a lot we can talk about, and I think it'd be good to maybe get you back another time because there's many, many topics.
Fantastic. Look forward to that also.
I'm going to go straight in with the first one. So you became a bodybuilder at some point. Obviously, you became carnivore. You achieved very great success on that. But I want to set the scene. Talk to me about what made you get into bodybuilding. What was your life like before you were a bodybuilder that made you decide, I'm going to get into that?
So let's take it back to when I left school. I weighed 7 stone.
Okay.
So I was incredibly small. I had very little muscle mass. I grew up in a poor family.
Okay.
So I was fed sausages, some form of meat every day, but predominantly potato.
Okay.
Every meal that I consumed was potato. So my mother used to buy one of these massive sack of spuds from a van up the road every week. I think she paid a £5 for it by memory. I wouldn't even know how much spuds cost these days because it's been a long time since I consumed any, but every meal would be carb orientated. But she used to cook these in lard. So we had a big chip fryer. So everything would be cooked in lard. That I thought was unhealthy. But as we know now, lard is incredibly good for you.
Yeah.
So it did serve me some benefits. So despite consuming high amounts of carbohydrate, every meal had some form of protein, whether it was processed or not. And I think that worked well, that boded well for me moving forward. But I left school at 7 stone. I was incredibly small, no muscle mass whatsoever.
How many kilograms would you say that is for the
7 stone? So what's that? I mean, it's I can work it out on the calculator.
It's probably about 50 something kilos, is it?
It's pretty like this. So I mean, it'd be the 7 multiplied by 14 divided by 2.2.
Okay. Okay, forget that. Yeah, so it's not a lot, shall we say, yeah.
We'll get that added into the...
yeah, we'll put it on the screen somehow.
But I was incredibly lean.
Yeah.
Very little muscle. I was bullied growing up because I was so small. I began working. I began earning my own money. I never had takeaways or fast food or anything like that growing up. Now and again, we'd have like once or twice a year, the little pop van used to come around and we'd have some sort of cola or, lemonade but they'd be in glass bottles. And it was very few and far between. So we didn't have these things very often. So very few treats. So what we did have though was always home cooked meals, despite the high carb content. It was, always potato, but some veg, but protein also.
Okay.
So I think that worked well. That allowed me not to become diabetic at the time. I began working, I began earning, and I felt the desire, the need to consume all the things that I felt I was deprived of.
Sweets and chocolate, I'm guessing.
Do you know, mostly it was, and I'll tell you where this came from. On my 13th birthday, or coming towards my 13th birthday, my mother asked me what I wanted for my 13th birthday. And I remember seeing a guy walking down the street with a burger. And the burger came from a local burger place called Napoli's. And it's still there. It's on the parade in Neath, in the town that I live in. And I remember looking at this burger thinking, oh my God, this thing looks absolutely incredible. And it was the size of my head, you know. And I said, I want a burger from Napoli's. That was my 13th birthday. And I looked forward to this for weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah. And when it came around and I had this burger, I only managed to eat half of the burger. It was absolutely massive. It was the nicest thing that I'd ever tasted in my life. There began the road to my addiction when it came to foods. I became addicted to burgers.
Right.
As I grew up and down my adult life of working, if I had to leave the office, or much later on now, my working life, whenever I had to go to site to work, I could not pass a burger van or a McDonald's or Burger King without stopping. And sometimes, quite often during these trips, I'd stop twice. So I was proper addicted to burgers in particular. That opened up this whole love for food when it came to takeaways, all sorts. I became a food addict.
Yeah.
I began working for an electrical engineering company.
Yeah.
I started there sweeping the floor, basically. So I wanted to join the army. When I went to be tested in order to join the army, before the fitness tests, I had to do an aptitude test, so similar to an IQ test. I scored somewhere between 70 to 80 on this test. The average is 100.
Okay.
So I was well below average. I wanted to go in and I wanted to become an engineer or a mechanic. But basically they told me that I was too stupid. So I wasn't able to go down the path that I wanted to. I was only able to go into inventory, and I was okay with that. But at the time, I used to suffer with severe migraines. I still suffer with migraines, but they're very few and far between. It's usually caused by a stressed state, lack of sleep, stress, which all come hand in hand when you're self-employed. So I still get these now and again, but I used to suffer with these every single day, for which I was on 3 different medications for, and we can get into that as we go along. So the long and the short is, when they found that I was still a sufferer of migraines, and when I get a migraine, I lose my vision. I go completely blind.
Wow.
I'm bedridden for 3 days. So I quite literally can't see a thing. I've got this, people would call it flashing lights, but it's like, for me, it's like looking through frosted glass. I could be looking directly at your face, and there would be a little circle covering your face, which would grow eventually to cover my whole vision, but I wouldn't be able to see. I wouldn't recognize who you were. I used to get this incredible heightened sense of sound. So I remember when I was bedridden one time and I was sleeping, I could hear a woodlice crawling on the ceiling. You know, and that's how.
Did you get bit by a spider and have webs come out of your wrists?
If I could have taken all of those positives, I could have been Spider-Man, but without the climbing ability. But but it's crazy how these senses are heightened in certain situations. But it was absolutely debilitating. So, and this was every day. So I'd have a continuous headache every day, pain, blurry vision, but it would get worse to the point where I'd become completely blind. So that was quite early on in my journey, just before I left school. In fact, I remember what caused it all. So I fell. I was play fighting in school. I fell and hit my knee on the concrete floor. And I remember walking home, and that was when the first migraine attack came on. Not nice for anyone who suffers with proper migraines that lose their vision. It's completely debilitating. I was working for this engineering company, still suffering with these migraines. I needed money, so I was. So that's what we left it, wasn't it? So I couldn't get into the army. They wouldn't let me in because of these migraines, because you can't be on the battlefield going blind, which I kind of understand. You know, so I'd looked at other options. I became. I started working for an electrical engineering company. I used to sweep the floor, clean the cupboards. Over the period of a couple of years, I worked my way up to becoming the assistant buyer, and then the buyer, the senior buyer. In the end, I was the purchasing manager. I ran a team of buyers for this multi-million-pound business. So super stressful, high-profile job, if you like, for one of the biggest Welsh engineering companies, local. And I was still short on money. So I set up an airport transfer business. I started driving people to the airport from Neath, Swansea in South Wales, all the way up to Heathrow and Gatwick, in between my day job. So out of hours, this is what I'd be doing for extra money. So lack of sleep, lots of fast food, lots of energy drinks. I then also began working as a delivery driver for an Indian takeaway. So I'd work from 6 till midnight doing that, and then I would drive people to the airport between midnight and 8 in the morning, where I'd drive straight back into my work as a purchasing manager. So I was juggling 3 jobs. My sleep was during breaks. I used to sleep during my morning break, during my lunch break, and my food would be consumed when I was on the go. So I'd be driving to the airport, eating fast food, essentially. At the end of my shift, when I was delivering for the Indian takeaway, I'd have a free meal. So I'd have that every night. I'd sometimes eat it while I was driving. And I doubled my body weight in a very short space of time. So
and not in a good way, I'm guessing.
Not in a good way. But I didn't notice, even though it happened in a short space of time. You don't see these things occur in yourself. So at the peak, I got to around 17.5 stone. And I was close to 60% body fat. I think by memory, it was around 56%. I may be wrong with that, but it was over half of my body weight was body fat. So that's not a healthy place to be. I wanted to do a parachute jump for charity. So my sister and I signed up to do a parachute jump, a tandem parachute jump with an instructor. But in order to do that, I needed to be, I think it was less than 14 stone. So I had to lose like 3.5 stone. I was constantly yo-yo dieting. I was doing all sorts of things. I was trying to be active. I was trying to lift weights and weight train at home and things. So I did go through lots of times in my life where I was implementing training. So I wasn't a lazy bum, you know. I was trying. I did everything that you can imagine to try to lose weight. I consumed food from the Eat Well plate, the food pyramid. My diet became, you know, the typical healthy diet that you would see that was predominated in grains. So the fast food and all this sort of took a backseat. And I started eating lots of vegetables at that time. And I didn't realize, but I found it more difficult to lose weight. And we can get into why as we go through. But I battled with basically calorie counting. And through that, over a period of a couple of months, I managed to lose 3.5 stone, whatever it was, to enable me to do this parachute jump. And I felt small, you know, so I felt lean. And I remember when we went to do the parachute jump, my sister was there. My sister is absolutely tiny. She's the smallest person you've ever seen in the world. And this giant of an instructor came in, and they were explaining about the weight distribution and how like they needed somebody heavier for her. And then this tiny little guy came in for me. And I was, you know, the question that I put forward was, if it's about the weight, well, why have I got this guy that's half my size? And he was tiny. And they both looked at each other, the instructors, as if to say, how do we tell you that you're overweight? And I didn't realize until I saw the pictures and the videos after. So I paid a lot of money for pictures, and I paid money, I think it was like 350 quid, which is a lot of money for me. And it was for the instructor to jump with us, to film the whole thing so I could show people, and it was a memory.
Do you still have that?
No. I destroyed it.
No way.
Yeah, I may have pictures somewhere, and I'll see if I can find
these. We'll see if we can put them on screen.
But I was absolutely devastated how overweight that I looked, because it wasn't until that time that I had this mask on. It's not a mask, it was like a hat that straps around your chin, and my cheeks, I look like a hamster.
Yeah, trapped in a lift.
Yeah. Coming down, you know, I just looked like a whale with a hamster face. And it was watching this video back, especially when it came to land, it just I looked like a whale hitting ground. You know, it looked absolutely awful. And it was in that moment that I realized that, you know, something's got to change. But I didn't know what to do. I was eating all the foods that I should be eating. I was waking in the morning, I was eating my muesli for breakfast.
And this was basically the food pyramid that you were trying to follow.
Yeah, so the food pyramid, the Eat Well plate, they're all pretty similar in regards to macronutrient ratios. They all predominate carbohydrates, predominantly plants, nuts and seeds. I was eating lots of, you know, we're told that these things are good for us and we're healthy. We're told that vegetables are packed with nutrients, and we can get into this as we go along.
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, I was eating protein, but very little. And I struggled with the weight. The weight thing was a big problem for me. Not too long after this, I was diagnosed as with type 2 diabetes. Only just in the diabetic range.
How old were you at this point?
This was mid to late 20s,
right?
Possibly. So at this time, I was now clinically obese. I was type 2 diabetic. I suffered with these daily debilitating migraines that would make me blind, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains.
And you look at the link between diabetes and eye health. I don't think that's a coincidence that you're experiencing those things, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think all of these things that I was suffering with, and we can really get into this as we go along, I think they were diet related. In fact, I mean, I'd 99.9% certain, because I've changed my diet.
Yeah.
And many of these things have completely gone away. As I say, the migraines are still there. I may get a couple throughout the course of the year, but the cause of these now is completely different, I believe. I think there's a number of different triggers that could be causal to the migraines. Stress and lack of sleep, which come hand in hand, which isn't ideal for the lifestyle we live.
I know.
But despite how strict that I live my life now, not that I think that living this way is strict at all. I think it's very indulgent, but many may look upon this as being a strict lifestyle from the outside. But I get to eat things, that are full of fat every day: steak and beef, lamb, bacon, cheese, eggs, all of the things that we're told that we shouldn't be eating, I get to eat on a daily basis. And I don't track.
Yeah.
I eat large quantities of these things. So I find it indulgent, but for somebody else from the outside world, they may deem it to be a lifestyle that's restrictive.
But you were still having that food pyramid when you first decided to become a bodybuilder.
Yeah. So I didn't decide to become a bodybuilder until I'd lost 7.5 stone.
Okay.
Basically. So
And this is after your diabetes diagnosis?
Yes.
Okay.
So they wanted to put me on medication. I didn't want any more medication. My mother takes lots and lots of medications for many other things. Every person in my family is on lots of medication for a myriad of problems. I didn't want to become, another one of these people. I was already on lots of medication, and I didn't know much about medication, but what we are told is when we're sick, we go to the doctor.
Yep.
The doctor gives us medication. The medication makes us better.
Yep.
But something didn't compute. It doesn't seem, how have we survived our entire existence before medication existed? Something didn't quite compute. I didn't want to add to the list of meds that I was already on. I was already on antidepressants, anti-inflammatories, beta blockers. I was on these. I was on Imigran and Sano Imigran. There was 3 medications I was consuming for my migraines at that time on a daily basis. Lots of antidepressants. I was depressed, but I had nothing to be depressed about, really. I was, at this point, everything in my life was going well. I had no reason to be depressed yet. I was always in a black hole, stuck in my boxes, if you like. And the analogy I quite often use is that, the anxiety was so bad for me that I spent my life living in boxes. So I lived in my house, my box. The only time I would leave my box is to go to work. So I jump in my metal box.
Yeah.
I drive my metal box to the engineering company that I worked in, a big box. And then I'd work inside a small box, inside this bigger box, my office. And that was my life.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, this was performed in reverse to go home. So my life was quite literally spent living in boxes. Now, I break boxes for a living.
Yeah.
So now I've gone from being confined to these boxes, and now I break boxes for a living. And this is what I do. I try to teach other people to break out of these boxes that we're confined in. But the anxiety for me was so bad that I never felt worthy of the company of others.
Yeah.
So I would struggle to leave my house. If there was a neighbor or somebody walking in the street or a car driving by. So I lived in a cul-de-sac, so there was very few people that you didn't know they were driving in. They were people, my neighbors. So they were people that I knew. But even then, I felt unworthy of their company. I never felt good enough to be around them. Every time I walk into a shop that was not a local corner shop or a Lidl, I always felt like I shouldn't be there, as if I was unworthy to be there. I'm not important enough to be there. I don't earn enough money to be there. If I ever walked into an expensive clothes shop with somebody, I'd feel as if I was being watched because they knew that I wasn't meant to be there, you know? And that's how my early life and my early adult life was spent. It's not a nice place to be, not feeling welcome or wanted, you know, and not worthy. But
I guess you wouldn't be where you are today if you didn't go through everything you've been through. And in a sense, I guess that was really good fuel to make you think, I've got to get healthier, I've got to lose this fat, I've got to pack on muscle mass, etc., etc.
Yeah, 100%. So I don't look at my past as a negative. I think you've hit the nail completely on the head. If it wasn't for this cascade of events, I wouldn't do what I do now. And that hasn't been plain sailing, and we can get into that journey as we go along, because it's a tough journey. You know, just pushing this lifestyle, you're ostracized from community in general. But the business that I've now started has taken a massive toll on work and family life, emotional life. You know, not many people know this, but I was homeless recently for as much as 11 months.
Wow.
Because at the time, I was quite successful in the job that I was working in. I'd started a number of businesses on the side. I started buying property. So I lived in a very nice house, a 4-bedroom house. I had 4 bathrooms. Why you'd ever need 4 bathrooms is beyond me, but I had 4 bathrooms. I had a massive garden, beautiful plants, a huge conservatory, hot tub. It was a proper hot tub, super expensive one. And that's not me showing off or bragging. It's just I was fortunate enough to be in the position that I could buy these things. I bought my dream car, which was a Mustang, a 5-litre Mustang, and I loved it. It was not my colour. It was bright yellow.
Okay.
So the opposite. I'm not a showy person, and anybody that really knows me, I think sometimes during interviews and on lives and public speaking events, I probably come across as being confident. I'm still that person.
Yeah.
But I've allowed myself, if you like, to pull down the walls and break those pillars that have stopped me, or those barriers that have stopped me from doing certain things. I look at it as hurdles.
Yeah.
And I've become good at jumping.
Yeah.
You know? So a horse race, an analogy for like, I can jump fences, whereas I couldn't jump these hurdles or fences previously.
And was it that jumping out of how you were feeling through or using bodybuilding as a way to jump out of where you were?
Yes, but what happened prior to that was I was in a situation in which I was offered medication, and I was convinced that I could do this myself. I don't know why. I'd never heard of low-carb diets, ketogenic diets, carnivore. These things just didn't exist. You know, I began my journey probably over a decade ago. You know, it seems to be everywhere now. Everyone has heard of keto and carnivore. This didn't exist, you know, at least in mainstream media. I didn't know anything about it at the time. But I knew that bread bloated me, and it made me feel uncomfortable. And I thought to myself, if I stop eating bread, if I can get rid of the bloat in my belly, then maybe it would give the impression that I wasn't so overweight.
Yeah.
So I stopped eating bread. I didn't diet. I just stopped eating bread. I just had other things. And other things from the food pyramid. Lots of vegetables, because vegetables are meant to be incredibly good for you. Mm-hmm. We can get into that later on. But I lost 2 stone. And I forget the time frame. A couple of times I've been asked this recently. I'm sure it was in as little as 4 weeks. I'm sure I lost 2 stone. I'm sure it was like 28 pounds over the course of 28 days or something stupid. But whatever it was 2 stone at an incredible rate. And I bumped into a friend of mine that I hadn't seen for 2 or 3 months. And he said, "What have you been doing? You know, you've lost lots of weight." No, I couldn't see that I'd lost this weight. He said, "You've lost," no, so I weighed, I'd lost this 2 stone. And I thought, yeah, there's something to this. What's going on? And he mentioned ketogenic lifestyles. And this was, I'd never heard of this word before. I mean, He could have been talking an alien language for all I knew. So I started hitting the internet and Google searches, but there was very little around. And what was available then, much of it was misinformation. So I began restricting carbohydrates. Now, I'd never known what a carbohydrate was to this point. You know, you hear people talking about carbs and proteins and fats. I knew what protein was. At least I thought I knew what protein was. And I thought I knew what fat was. But Carbs and how they work in the body, I wasn't familiar with. So I started to look at the back of packets and restricting carbs. A super long story short, over the course of that 12 months, I lost 107 pounds. Within that time, I'd reversed my diabetes. I was now in a non-diabetic range. My cholesterol went through the roof, which was a concern at the time. My migraines had cleared up. Now I was off my migraine medication, and I'd been on these for a very long time, since my school days.
And how long was this again, you said, that time period?
So that was within 12 months.
12 months. You lost 107 pounds.
7.5 stone.
You came off your meds. Your migraines disappeared. And your body composition would have basically gone as close as you've ever been to normal.
Yeah. So I was basically well under now, 10 stone. Because I'd started dieting prior to this, through calorie counting and so on and so forth. So at that point, I was no longer at the 17. I was a little bit less, but that took me under 10 stone. So I was incredibly lean again. I was very much the way that I looked when I'd left school.
Yeah.
Except I had abs.
Yeah.
And I had veins and I had a little bit of muscle, but I hadn't done any training.
Okay.
So other than just general, moving, I hadn't done, but my body composition was completely different to when I'd left school. So I had this energy and I had a secret. I found a secret that I wanted to tell the world about. I just reversed all of these things, which I told that I was going to have for the rest of my life. And I wanted to tell the world about it. Nobody's going to listen to a grown man that looks like a little boy. So I began training. I began buying home weights for a room in the house at the time. This was before the conservatory. I was lifting weights and I started to build muscle. And at a rate that just seemed stupid to me at the time.
So you were starting this routine of working out after having actually gone into a roughly ketogenic diet first?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So the weight, I was no doubt ketogenic at this point. Through this time, I'd researched to the nth degree in regards to whether I understood it or not, but to the best of my knowledge, I'd researched as much as I could and understood. At this point, I knew that carbohydrates brought into sugar. I worked out that sugar elicited an insulin response. And when we elicit an insulin response, this upregulates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which breaks the bonds on the glycerol backbone and sends fatty acids into the fat cell. So in a sense, an insulin response tells the body to store fat. And then I discovered that in order for us to put these fatty acids back into the system, we need another enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase in order to perform this in reverse, if you like, and break the bonds on the glycerol backbone to allow fatty acids to be put back into the bloodstream so we can burn them. The interesting thing with this is when insulin is elevated, insulin blocks hormone-sensitive lipase. So there's a double kick in the teeth with this, that when we elicit an insulin response, it tells the body to store fat, and it also puts a biological lock on our fat stores and prevents us from burning fat. And I know you know all this, but for the sake of the viewers, we're going to simplify things. So insulin tells the body to store fat, and it also puts a biological lock on the fat stores, preventing you from burning fat. Now, if you were to consume a bowl of muesli before going for a run in order to give you energy so you can burn fat, that is not going to happen if that insulin response is still increased. We need insulin to come back down for us to be able to burn that body fat. So do not eat your bread, pasta, rice or muesli before going to do a run if weight loss is your goal. And I would also say not to eat any of those compounds anyway. But and again, we can get into that as we go. But this was incredibly early in my journey, so I'd started restricting things like the breads, the pastas, rice, cakes and the sweet treats, things that we knew, processed foods, things that we knew that elicited an insulin response. Processed foods only because I knew the processed foods were not good for me. I didn't understand why at the time, but I was at this stage in which I wanted to tell the world about my secrets. I started lifting weights, started building muscle, and then within 6 to 12 months, I actually looked pretty good. I looked in the mirror and I thought, I've got abs, I'm ripped with veins. I'm not big, but I'm small, but I look fit. And I thought, the the only way that I can get this word out is by being on stage, getting pictures that I can post on social media. So I decided to enter a men's physique bodybuilding competition. It was local to me. The first one that I ever competed in was in Bridgend, so a 20-minute drive away. It was an amateur comp. So your local gym goers, so people such as myself, but many of these people have been training for many, many years. I'd literally had 6 to 12 months of training for this. Now, this is someone who suffers with severe anxiety and depression. I was stuck in boxes. The thought of leaving my box to step foot on stage in essentially my pants to be critiqued by an audience of people, because that's why you're there. These people are not there to look at how good you look. They're there to look at things that are not as good as the next person. So you're quite literally being compared to these other people.
It's basically an anxiety dream for most people, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I remember when I got to this competition, and my friends and family before this had begged me not to do this competition because they knew how bad my anxiety and depression was.
What year are we talking here, roughly?
Oh, my goodness, what year was this? This must have been early 30s, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm 40 now, going on 41.
So about mid 2010s, roughly.
Mid 2010s, quite possibly, yeah. I mean, I don't want to throw figures out there.
Yeah, fine.
But this was, this was still quite early in my journey. But the thing for me was walking onto stage with the fear of everybody critiquing me. And when you walk on stage, there's a curtain lining just before you come on. So you're backstage and then you walk on stage and the curtains are open there. I was the last in the lineup walking on, and I stopped just before the curtains. I couldn't walk on. A friend of mine called me from the audience. Come on, Rich. And that gave me the encouragement. So if that friend wasn't there, I would have never have competed. And I think this journey would have just probably ended there. So I walked on stage. I forgot how to walk. I was so nervous. My legs became jelly. I had to concentrate so hard to put one foot in front of the other. And I remember thinking, this doesn't look right on camera as I'm walking. It can't, because it feels like I'm going to fall over. As it happens, it didn't. It was all in my head. But my legs felt like I could have fallen over any time. Anyway, I competed and I came second. I came second in this competition. And I came off stage and I was buzzing. The adrenaline was going. I thought, my God, I've got... And I only ever I considered competing once. I never had any inclination to compete again. This was a one-time thing. I was super impressed with the pictures. Friends and family couldn't believe it. Now all the haters came out. All people that you think are friends, begin to tell you, you don't look good. Why are you on stage? You're not about... So this created a divide between friends. And because of it, I lost an awful lot of black holes, that I call them. Black holes, these people that you don't want to be around. And again, we can get into this. But I did compete again. I went back a year later.
Same competition.
The same federation, the same competition. Was it in a different place? It may have been in a different location. I can't remember. But I entered a few different categories this time. So I came second and third in these categories. Now the competition was much better. So from the year prior, the people competing had already improved. Now the person who had beaten me, because I came second, I knew he was competing the year after. And all that year, that's what I envisaged, is competing against this guy. He didn't compete. So, he said all year he was competing and he didn't compete. So he was never there for me to compete against. But they were competitors who were better. He did come back later on. I think it was either the next or the year after, and I beat him, in that competition. But every year the competition became harder. The physiques were way better than the year prior. But mine was improving, hand over fist.
And you were still keto at this point?
Yes, yeah, still keto. I did fall off the wagon many times. I'm only human. And I think this is important for people to understand. If you can maintain, and I don't want to use the word strict, but if you can abstain from consuming certain compounds and not falling off the wagon, you're going to adapt a lot quicker. But I think for me, making all of these mistakes and falling off the wagon, I quite literally fell into every pit hole that you can imagine. And I think this is what has allowed me to learn and understand how this lifestyle works, because I was trying to do all the things that the internet was telling me to do. So many misconceptions. And again, we can get into the weeds with this as we go along, but it allowed me to learn so much. So I can teach people not to make the same mistakes. But yes, I'd fallen off the wagon many times during my journey, but this is all about the rule and not the exception. Consistency is key. And I was consistent. I was consistently keto way more than I ever, fell off the wagon.
And was your weight going up as you were competing more?
Yes.
The amount of muscle mass going up?
Yeah.
So when you, in your first competition versus when you won the European Championship, can you give us an idea of what your weight was, difference?
So this is interesting. So as I competed year on year, my body fat in each competition became less and less. So I remember the first competition, I was only just under 10%. Every year after that, I managed to get 1 to 2% off come comp day. It didn't matter how much that I dieted to an extremity. And that's what bodybuilding is. But competing isn't healthy. Yep. You push your body to such a limit that it becomes unhealthy. But it's fit for purpose. It's trying to achieve a goal. Competing in the Olympics isn't healthy. You push your body to a limit.
I agree.
But it's all about achieving a goal. And that's what I wanted to do. So interestingly, my weight was creeping up. But towards the end of my career, if you like, in the world of bodybuilding, my weight hadn't increased much as far as my stage weight, but what had changed was my body composition, my fat percentage. The last time I competed, I'm estimating around 2% body fat. And I say I estimate because I took an in-body composition test 2 weeks after I competed in the European Championship as a professional. And I was 3% 2 weeks after.
My God.
And I know that I'd gained fat, so I must have been at least 2%. I remember at that time giving consultations and public speaking events and not being able to form words because my body didn't have enough fat.
Your brain needs fat to function properly, right?
Exactly.
So that's interesting. So from your first competition to winning Euro Championships, your body fat was going down, your muscle mass inevitably was going up, and you were ketogenic when you started. Would you say by the time you won the European Championship, you were full-blown carnivore?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And what made you say, right, I'm going to be full carnivore now as opposed to just keto, and why?
So years and years of studying. So basically, I'm trying to teach people about how healthy this lifestyle is, how life-changing. So I quit my job as a purchasing manager. I retrained as a nutritionist. Not that much of the things that I was taught at the time were true. In fact, many of them were not, but it was a case of just being qualified in something, having that certification to allow me to do what I wanted to do. I began coaching initially for free, and off the back of that was the birth of my business, Keto Pro, and we can talk about that later if you like also. But it's through many years of looking into nutrition, I learned that many of the nutrients found in plants didn't actually exist in true form, true human form.
Yeah.
And we can get into some examples. But going carnivore did allow me to achieve better health. And the reason that I did this was, and I quite often say to people, it was through laziness. I mean, I don't think it was through laziness. It was just because I was working 7 days a week. I was very busy with my job. It takes a few minutes to fry a steak.
Yeah.
So I stopped cooking vegetables. I used to consume bowls and bowls of broccoli, spinach with everything. I used to make spinach and turmeric smoothies with black pepper every day. And don't get me wrong, I was the healthiest that I'd ever been at this point. And if you had told me at that point that what I was doing there was causing me harm, I wouldn't have believed it.
No one would. Even bodybuilders now who eat chicken and rice every day, they won't believe you when you say you could be doing a lot better.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, one of the issues that people like yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, would have faced is you are the healthiest you have ever been. Doesn't mean you're the healthiest you could be, but you're the healthiest you've been. And I think one of the reasons people struggle to believe any different and risk changing is because they don't want to lose what they've achieved up to that point. Would 100%. You say you were in that camp?
Yes, but also learning that restricting carb had allowed me to build lots of muscle. We're told that we can't build muscle without carb. Carbohydrate is not required to build muscle. And in fact, carbohydrate has zero impact on muscle protein synthesis. Nothing at all, if adequate protein is consumed. So if we consume enough protein, that will elicit an mTOR response, and that's elicited primarily by leucine. And this allows us to build muscle. We do not need carbohydrate. We can activate mTOR via an insulin response through carbohydrate. But if we consume enough protein, we don't need that carbohydrate. And this is what people don't understand. So carbs do not increase muscle protein synthesis. What does increase muscle protein synthesis is the co-ingestion of protein and fat. Eating your protein with your fat increases muscle protein synthesis. Consuming foods as nature intended. If we look at what we would have consumed our entire existence, we would have been eating animal proteins.
Did you know this back then? At the point where you were studying and you know that phase where you decided I'm going to go carnivore, was this known to you back then?
Yes. So this was, yeah. I mean, and this is what I was trying to teach. So this I'd learned very early in my journey because I was building muscle without consuming any carbohydrate. The standard sort of ketogenic protocol predominates fats, moderate amounts of protein, and you're allowed 20% or 20 grams, of calories, if you like, from carbohydrate. But I was on close to zero, other than any carbohydrate at the time that was found in the low carb vegetables that I was consuming, which is incredibly low. I wasn't consuming carbohydrates. So as I gravitated deeper into that, there was less veg involved, and I was consuming zero veg, no fruit, nothing that contained any form of carbohydrate. I wasn't consuming organ meats at the time. Organ meats do contain glycogen, so they will have some carbohydrate in there. But at the time, I was completely zero carb, building muscle hand over fist, creating and achieving a physique that very little I'd competed against had ever seen before. I was never massive. I was never huge. I was never the biggest. But what used to allow me to win these competitions was because I was coming there with a physique that nobody else could achieve. I had a dry look, incredibly ripped and shredded. You could see all the muscle fibers twitching with my movements. Everybody else looked bigger, but they had a smoother look. So I didn't win on size. Bodybuilding it's an illusion. It's about posing in the correct way to make the best of your body. So at the time, I had massive delts. I had huge lats with a super narrow waist. So when I was in certain positions...
You got that V-taper.
Yeah. So I had an incredible physique for men's physique. And that's what allowed me to win. But pushing on from that, I became a professional. So I was awarded pro status for coming third. And within this federation, I was one of only two people at the time to ever be awarded pro status from a place. Basically, there was so little between the three of us that I was awarded a pro card. I went back the year later. I came second in a massive competition. The year after that, I competed in the Middlesbrough Championship. And at this point, I'd never won anything. I'd only ever placed. I always placed, but I'd never won a competition.
And you were still keto, not carnivore at this point?
No, at this point, I'd transitioned into carnivore. Okay. So at this point, I was carnivore.
Yeah.
I said there's variations to carnivore also.
Of course,
we can get into this. But I mean, I'd class myself now as a strict carnivore. I was predominantly carnivore. So, I mean, if we look at the technical term, and I hate using the word calories, and we can get into that as we go along.
I think it's easy for people to understand, so we'll use it for today. But I think we both agree that it's not a useful terminology.
Yeah, I think it's for the masses, it's what we understand.
Yeah.
So, from a caloric perspective, a carnivore would obtain 70% of the calories from animal proteins. And I was doing way more than that.
Yeah.
Now all of my calories come from animal proteins.
Yeah.
So I was carnivore, but I was still dabbling with other things. I was eating maybe mushrooms now and again, cooked in butter, and other compounds which were not meat but not vegetables, per se. Or I was eating little bits, or sometimes little bits of fruit maybe now and again. But I mean, I'm talking tiny amounts of fruit in regards to berries, but that was very few and far between. Nuts and seeds, I was eating lots of. I still believed that nuts and seeds were really good for me.
Yeah. But you were doing none of that by the time you got to the European stage.
Yes, that's right.
So you were full carnivore then. And when you got to that European stage, were there any other competitors who were carnivore?
So not in the European Championship, but in the British Championship, yes. So the Middlesbrough Championship was a week prior to the British Championship. Now, I won the Middlesbrough Championship. It was the first time that I'd ever won any competition in my life. I broke down and started crying on stage. And somebody said to me after, what are you crying for? It's like, you don't understand how much I put into this.
Yeah.
I was training my butt off. At the time, I still believed that training long hours was really important. I now know different. But, I was working. I trained twice a day, 2 hours a day on weight training. No cardio, by the way. Zero cardio for my prep. Everybody else was putting lots of cardio in. I'd won the Middlesbrough Championship. At the end of the competition, they supply a massive buffet of Domino's pizza and donuts and anything you can think of. And everybody is at because we've been dieting for months, so everybody is going for these foods or non-foods. They're not foods.
Yeah,
going
plastic.
For these, going for these compounds. And I was the only person that I can remember who abstained completely. I didn't touch any, and I was craving these compounds. I'd been dieting for so long, I was craving anything. And you get a feeling of wanting and deserving these compounds. Now, there's a thing in bodybuilding, like when you cut, you look forward to breaking this whole thing and consuming all of the compounds that you hadn't consumed for all of the time that you were, cutting, and really, really abstaining from these compounds. So I used to buy a bag, and I used to put, whenever I went shopping, if I saw something that I wanted, a chocolate bar, for example, I'd build up this little bag of goodies that I would just demolish, which isn't a good idea, by the way. And towards the end of my career, I didn't do those things. But I didn't do this in the Middlesbrough Championship because the British Championship was the Sunday after. And I knew that if I'd eaten any of those compounds, I just would have ballooned. I would have overspilled, and that would have been it for me. So I didn't consume any of those compounds. A week later, I came back. I won the British Championship. So the second win in my career as a pro came from the Middlesbrough Championship and the British Championship.
A week apart.
Then COVID happened.
Yeah.
So competing was sort of intermittent. There were competitions, but there was different phases of COVID where you could have competed. But I couldn't fly to America for there was the World Championship because I hadn't been vaccinated, so I didn't have any vaccines. I was unable to fly. I was able to compete in the UK, but I wasn't able to fly. So I had the opportunity to fly to America for the World Championship, but I couldn't make it. So when everything had cleared up, the European Championship was open. And I'd already sort of pre-qualified for that. So I went, the European Championship was in Italy. So I flew to Italy. I competed in the European Championship and I won. In fact, I competed in two categories. I first in one and second in the other. So I was number one in Europe in my category. This is from being unable to walk up the stairs without stopping or being severely out of breath. Type 2 diabetic, clinically obese, suffering with a myriad of conditions, daily debilitating migraines, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains, acne. I was covered in acne, all over my face, all over my back. Earlier, in the journey in my mid-20s, all of these things had gone away. And now I was number one in Europe. So unable to walk up the stairs to be number one in Europe. And this occurred through the diet. Now, there's nothing special about me. I'm not genetically gifted. In fact, my genetics, I would say, are pretty poor.
Same here.
Yeah, but we think that we are governed by our genetics, but we can control certain aspects of our genetics through something called epigenetics. So we can flick the switch for certain genes. We can flick the switch to become unhealthy, or we can flick the switch to become healthy. And 70 to 80% of epigenetics can be controlled through diet and lifestyle. Yes, I was training hard, but I'd always trained prior to that. I'd always tried to train, but adopting this lifestyle allowed me to train more, allowed me to recover more, give me this energy that made me want to do stuff, made me want to be active, which I didn't have prior to this.
So you're saying in the training process, because of this particular diet and lifestyle, the main changes that you noticed were things like being able to train harder, however people wish to define that. Your recovery was, shall we say, quicker or improved. And also your health problems, which you just listed at the same time, also went away.
Yeah.
And what was the response you got when other people in the competition on, say, a European stage learned that you're eating this way, which is the complete opposite of what we're told to do when you're training?
Yeah. So I was ostracized in the early days. I was the guy that didn't eat carbs. So everybody mixes in little groups within the backstage of these competitions, and I wasn't part of any group. I was the freak in the corner. I used to keep my hoodie on. All of the other guys for a conference would have their tops off, walking, and it is warm there. Many people think that when you compete, you have a very high opinion of yourself. But what I did find is many compete because of the opposite. They compete for this justification. They want someone else to tell them they're good enough.
Like a psychological reason almost.
And this is one of the reasons that I kept competing and training hard, because I had such a low opinion of myself. A trophy is a sign that you've achieved something. And it costs a lot of money to compete with traveling and, eating healthy. I was consuming leucine and citrulline malate and lots of protein powders. I make protein powders, so I was consuming lots of those. It becomes expensive.
Yeah.
Especially the traveling and the competing, the tans and all sorts of things, and then buying the photographs and the videos. So it's not cheap to do these things. But it's all justified when you handed a £5 plastic trophy. It's like all of that cost is like, this is worth it, because it's what that trophy stands for.
Yeah. And all those guys who thought you were a weirdo for not having carbs, it kind of throws it in their face.
It does. And every year when I came back, I was kind of more accepted. But every year I'd wear my hoodie and I wouldn't take it off until just before stage. So at the backstage, you'd get a pump on. So you'd have some weights and you'd start to get pumped up. And then I would take my hoodie off, and I always remembered that the other competitors would sort of do a double take. So they'd give it this.
Yeah.
Because I'd take it off and I'd just because I'm small, physically small. But when my hoodie came off, tiny waist, massive delts. The delts that I grew, and there's a picture on the internet, you can see how big the delts are. My delts were massive. They used to add, I reckon, half a foot to, and I'm not exaggerating when you actually pop the delts. I was, I don't have them now because I'm not training, but that was a massive part of my physique. And the lats also, comparative to the rest of my body, that they were heavily prominent. But they used to do a double take. But year after year, I was sort of more accepted. And then during the British Championship, there were two guys that I met who knew me from posting online, who were also ketogenic or carnivore. So I won my category in the British Championship. These other guys were in the same category, in a different category, so they were in a category together, but not in my category. One of them won and the other came second. So you're talking 3 ketogenic carnivore athletes, and we all basically did as good as we could have, first and second. That's got to stand for something when you look at a percentage. But within the bodybuilding community, it was always, keto is only good for endurance athletes. It's no good for power and bodybuilding. And, these numbers are going to sound poor to you because I know that you were a power lifter and incredibly strong, way stronger than me. So these are going to sound embarrassing. But I remember looking at what I was able to achieve at the time when I decided to come away from bodybuilding, because I looked at powerlifting. My bench press at 75k, or maybe under 75k just, was 165k. My deadlift was 230 and my squat was 190. Nice. So squat was a weak area, but my I know your deadlift was something like 300, which is absolutely...
My PB was 251.
Wow.
But I would need to get above that to about 300 to compete again.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get a picture of myself in the video.
Yeah, I think we should both jump back into powerlifting and set the world on fire. But I remember looking at the rankings. So there's a website you can go for the rankings within the UK in powerlifting, and you can select tested and non-tested federations, or all federations.
Or drugs and non-drugs, shall we say?
Yes, basically, yeah. And look, I've got nothing against anyone who wants to supplement with anything.
Neither have I. Neither have I.
As long as you're competing in the right category.
Yeah.
If you were competing and you were supplementing with anabolics, then don't compete in a non-tested.
Completely agree.
Fair,
Completely agree.
If you want to do those things, that's fine. Just
do it safely and do it in an appropriate time.
Exactly. So I never competed in powerlifting, but I looked at competing and I checked all of the categories of tested and non-tested. And at that time, if I could have achieved all of those lifts on the same day, which I'd never trained for powerlifting before, so I think a bit of training that I could have, I would have been in the top 10 at that point in Britain, in my age and weight.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, there are lots of different categories with this. So I'm not saying I was the strong, top 10 strongest. Sure. This is to do with my age and weight. But I tore my pec. So I gravitated into running and cycling because I've been working with endurance athletes. But at the time, all of the bodybuilders were, keto is not for bodybuilding. Yet I was like, well, super strong for my size. I'd already become British and European champion. It's like, what more do you want?
That dogma is still there quite a lot today. It's still not changed. It's going to take a long time to change.
It is.
What would you, in terms of, from a scientific perspective, you've been there, you've won Europe, you've done all these things. What is it about a carnivore diet in terms of the difference between that and a standard Western diet that you feel makes it better for muscle growth or packing on muscle mass?
So look, there's a number of factors, but if we look how we've evolved, and we know this is the case in regards to what I'm going to say, because when we look at protein testing, nitrogen isotope testing,
spiking,
we can see that 40,000 years ago, we consumed predominantly animal proteins. And in fact, when we look at the percentages, 1 to 7% would be classed as a vegetarian, if you like, or a vegan. Somewhere between 6 to 12% would be more animal-based. In fact, closer to 12% is more carnivore. 10 to 12% is probably, in fact, completely carnivore. Well, 40,000 years ago, from these testings, we know that we were 13%. So we weren't just carnivore, we were hyper-carnivore. So all we would have consumed is animal proteins unless they were not available. And that's a fact. We consumed these our entire existence. And when we look back as far as 1.5 million to 2 million years ago during the Australopithecus period, we've noticed a similar thing there. So we were always meat eaters, and that is without question. There was a time prior to that it was mixed, and I think it was around Homo habilis as we came into Australopithecus that we gravitated into eating more animal protein. So we know for the better part of 1.5 to 2 million years, we've consumed nothing but animal proteins. So this is an evolutionarily appropriate diet. These other compounds that we would have consumed would have been survival foods. So I'm not saying that we didn't consume certain plants during periods of famine, but what we see as vegetables today or foods were not the type of foods that existed then.
I mean, carrots, for instance, didn't even used to be orange.
Exactly.
I think they were purple, right, at one point.
Yeah.
Some vegetables we have now are man-made.
Yeah.
So the idea that we are being natural from the perspective of vegan ideologues, I think you would agree, is complete nonsense.
Yeah.
When it's man-made.
100%. It's apples were not these giant things. And apples in the UK would have been tiny little crab type apples. They didn't taste the way that they used to. Lots of crops have been hybridized. We didn't get into cultivating until a few thousand years ago. And when I think it stretches back as far as 10,000. And there was an article that was produced. I can't remember the magazine that it was brought out in, but it was a scientific paper that showed that since we introduced agriculture, human disease has increased
100%,
and it's all tied into those compounds that we consume. Grains are not healthy. Grains are not natural in the way that we consume them today because they've been hybridized, genetically modified to produce a higher yield, to produce money.
Even animals to an extent,
and animals,
which is a shame.
And
I think cutting all those out, it makes sense why you can beat the carb athletes or the omnivore athletes, shall we say. What do you think the isolation of meat, because I think we're both pretty strict carnivores now. What is it about isolating that allows us to have a greater muscle growth, do you think?
So when we look at a standard lifestyle, so let's look at a standard bodybuilder's lifestyle, which predominates carbohydrate, which is clean-ish compared to a standard lifestyle, if you like. The average diet contains lots of processed foods, but we know processed foods are not good for us. But from a bodybuilding perspective, it's lots of chicken and vegetables and rice, and brown rice predominantly, which is the worst kind that you can consume. White rice is lectin-free, and lectins there are the key to why lectins and phytic acid and other compounds, anti-nutrients that are found in vegetables that prevent us from achieving certain things. So when we consume, let's say a plate of broccoli or spinach or whatever our go-to is with some animal protein, one, they're consuming lean protein, and protein should be consumed with fat. So that extra response of an mTOR activation or muscle protein synthesis is lower if we do not consume the protein with fat. So that's one point. But the vegetables that these people consume contain lectins and phytic acid. Lectins and phytic acid can block the absorption of other nutrients like zinc, iron, and magnesium by as much as 100%. Zinc is essential for the production of testosterone. Testosterone we need to build muscle. Zinc and iron also essential for many of the functions in regard to energy within the muscle and building muscle, carrying oxygen to the muscle. So to block these is absolutely counterintuitive. So the phytic acids will do this. So already there, the nuts, the seeds, the vegetables, the grains are counterintuitive to building, just being healthy, but allowing the body to absorb these nutrients. Now, secondary to that, lectins. Lectins are a carbohydrate binding protein, which are found in animal proteins as well as plants, but they're two very different things. The lectins in animal proteins seem to confer a benefit. The lectins from plants cause problems. So the lectins from plants in the form of, and we all know gluten. Gluten is a lectin that most people know, so many people will suffer from a gluten intolerance. Many people may suffer when they consume these compounds and test for gluten sensitivity and show negative. But this gluten sensitivity, there's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It's a spectrum, and we are all on this spectrum. So if you can basically show negative to gluten intolerance, but still be susceptible to gluten through this non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So gluten is a big one. But there's another compound called wheat germagglutinin, which is a lectin found in wheat, obviously in grains. Now this binds, if we imagine, and for the listeners on the podcast, I'll explain this as best I can, but within our gut we have microvilli, little fingers, if you like. And these little fingers allow us to absorb nutrients. So the nutrients will come in, they'll bind to each part of the microvilli, and this is how we absorb all of our vitamins and minerals. Lectins will come into the body, and they'll bind to receptor sites on the microvilli, and basically they'll reduce the surface area. So now, instead of having all of this surface area to absorb nutrients, we're stuck with this. So the surface area is massively reduced, which is absolutely counterintuitive to healing, building, and repairing.
And it makes sense why you can't absorb the nutrients in meat when you have the meat with vegetables and things, right?
Spot on. So if we consume a compound of rice, pasta, or whatever with highly nutrient-dense animal proteins, it offsets, it prevents the body from absorbing many of these nutrients. Yes, we can still absorb them. This is why we see huge people on stage. But a lot of these people are using anabolics also. And again, I'm not against that. But there are other contributing factors to this. But you can still build muscle. But coming back to what you mentioned earlier, is it optimal? And for me, it wasn't optimal. When I removed these anti-nutrients, because this is what plants are. Plants are anti-nutrients. This allows me to absorb all of the vitamins and minerals. Now, when I was clinically obese, I was consuming 2.5, maybe around 2,700 calories per day. And this made me clinically obese and type 2 diabetic from a high grain diet. Non-processed foods. This was predominantly grains, lots of, broccoli and spinach and kale and so on and so forth. When I removed those, became carnivore and ate predominantly animal proteins, now some days I can consume as much as 6,000. So my diet on average is 4,000 to 6,000 calorie equivalent per day. And yet I'm still single-figure body fat. I'm not in the shape that I was when I was bodybuilding, but again, I'm trying to achieve something different, so my physique is different. I've still got what I'd call washed-out abs. To the average person on the beach, I probably got up. To me, I would never show anyone because it's embarrassing because, I think we look back at the way we were when we were competing and that's, but
I'll cancel the strip show for later.
the ab off. But,
so what do you think of, I mean, that makes sense in terms of the muscle building. What about the idea of fat loss? Because part of competing is not just building muscle, but it's also to be able to see the definition of that muscle. And you mentioned that you could see the striations of the muscles a little bit clearer in yourself compared to the other competitors. What is it about the carnivore diet that is better for fat loss, to put it in lay terms?
So if you become carnivore, if you're living a carnivore lifestyle, you are still in the metabolic state of ketosis. Yes, you may teeter in and out, but this is the natural state, but predominantly within the metabolic state of ketosis. So for the sake of the viewers, there are two metabolic states, glycolysis and ketosis. Glycolysis burns sugar for fuel. So this is where I was prior to this. I was a sugar burner. carbs is sugar, and this is an important takeaway. If you consume carbohydrate, all carbohydrates break down into sugar, with the exception of things like ribose and deoxyribose, which make up, the DNA. Prior to, excluding those, all forms of carbohydrate that we use for energy basically break down into sugar. On the back of a packet, if it says, for example, 80 grams carbohydrate, of which sugar's 5, then that's a fallacy, because that's of which sugar's immediately, but the rest will be stored as glycogen, which will be sugared through glycogenolysis later and used as glucose. So we will always, those carbohydrates always sugar eventually. So carbs equals sugar. We shouldn't have two different lines splitting up the difference between carbohydrates, because they are one and the same, and that's an important takeaway. So restricting carbohydrates allows us to control our insulin reactions. So to allow us to be ketogenic, we need elevated glucagon, which sounds counterintuitive because glucagon elicits a glucose response. And I know this sounds absolutely mental, but we need low insulin and elevated glucagon, and we need carnitine. And in order to do this, basically we need to eat animal proteins. Or we can elicit the same response through not eating at all, which is why when we look at fasting, it's quite often called a ketogenic mimicked state. Which is why living this way is environmental, by the way, which is something that I want to get into later in regards to hormesis. So we'll circle back to that. But it's basically you're in a ketogenic state. So you're in a ketogenic state. What happens is you're in a state of autophagy, which many people will fast to get, but we're in this state constantly. So if people are fasting, so anyone who consumes a carbohydrate diet who's implementing fasting, which may be counterintuitive, and that's open for debate, but when we're ketogenic, we're constantly in a state of autophagy, mitophagy, brown fat activation, BDNF activation, increased insulin sensitivity, and lipolysis. All of these are activated through the production of ketones naturally. And ketones are a compound that we can talk about as we go. Incredible compound that do many things in the human body. But when we are living a carnivore lifestyle, we're not eliciting this insulin response as high. And we do elicit an insulin response, and this is important. Insulin isn't the demon. We look at insulin and cortisol as being the devil and the demon. These are things that we need.
If you don't have cortisol, you're literally dead.
Yeah.
As soon as you wake up, your cortisol rises, and if you have zero stress, you're a goner.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you.
It's these are things and pathways that are essential for life. We've demonized them. I don't want to spike my insulin. Well, these things are essential. So what people don't understand is when we elicit this response through consuming animal proteins, then that insulin response is needed to drive those amino acids into the cell. Now, if you were to ask the average person what is the role of insulin, and I was studying some textbooks recently which said, the exact thing, that insulin drives glucose into cells. That's its job. That's a fallacy. It's yes, it does those things, but insulin is there to put amino acids into cells primarily, not so much the sugars. The sugars shouldn't be there. The reason that the body will elicit this response and pull blood glucose from the blood into it is to save your life.
Yeah,
because excessive amounts of glucose in the blood is toxic. The muscle is used as a storage facility, if you like, in order for us to drip feed this in as and when we need it. But the whole premise behind carb loading, when this happens and we fill our glycogen stores, this is happening to save your life. It's not happening because we're filling up the energy store so we can be superhuman. In fact, it's counterintuitive. For every 1 gram of glycogen we store, we hold 3 to 4 grams of water. So as an athlete who's competing in powerlifting, well, that's counterintuitive.
Power to weight ratio.
Power to weight ratio. Now you're in a heavier category, and it's you need to be able to lift more. As a runner, it's counterintuitive. As a cyclist, it's counterintuitive. As a boxer, it's counterintuitive. So all of these, it doesn't matter which sprinter, so on and so forth. It's absolutely counterintuitive to fill your muscles full of glycogen. Now, the interesting thing that when you are ketogenic and carnivore, we fill the muscle with glycogen when we need it. So through a process called gluconeogenesis. So glucose, neo being new, and genesis is the creation of. This is something that we can do naturally within our body. And anybody can do this, but it's elicited usually through a low insulin response. People call it a stress response. And I can see where the thinking comes into this, because cortisol is required for a state of gluconeogenesis or some form of stress hormone.
Yeah.
Glucagon can also elicit the response, and epinephrine. So there are other mechanisms in order to allow us to perform gluconeogenesis. But so I can understand why they call it a stressed state, but I don't believe these to be stressed hormones per se. I'd like to think them as reactive hormones rather than stressed hormones. But when we are in the state and we manage to elicit that process of gluconeogenesis, what happens is when we are moving our muscles, the muscles fill with lactate. Now, bodybuilders and people in the gym, when they're lifting weights, they'll feel a burn. Yeah. Now, they'll chase this burn. This burn is counterintuitive because it shows an inefficiency within the muscle. Basically, the body's ability to buffer those hydrogen ions is ineffective. So we don't want the burn. And what many find, and you can probably attest to this, is when you're lifting weights now, it gets to the point where the burn should come and it doesn't. And you don't get the burn, but the weights, your arm's ability to lift just slow down until you can't lift, and you just physically can't lift anymore, but you don't get the burn. Yeah. And the reason for this is that the lactate is shuttled to the liver, where the liver will elicit this gluconeogenic response. It'll go through pyruvate. What's the next step? But it's phosphoryl pyruvate. Yeah. And then it'll basically perform glycolysis in reverse, bar 3 different enzymes. So it almost follows the exact process of making, or allowing us to use glucose for energy in reverse to make glucose. So where we have glucose that makes pyruvate, we're doing this in reverse, bar 3 different. So it is a different mechanism, but very, very similar. This will go through fructose 6-phosphate, the enzyme, and then glucose 6-phosphate. There are differences to the production of, or the conversion of glucose into pyruvate, but very similar. And what happens is we create this glucose, and then the liver sends it to the muscle at a higher rate than even a carb athlete. And we know this through muscle biopsy testing. So athletes have been tested before, during, and after an event to measure their muscle glycogen levels. Carbohydrate athletes who have consumed carbs prior, so carb loaded, consumed carbs during and carbs after, the muscle glycogen levels at every stage of testing has been either equal to or higher in the ketogenic adapted athletes. Wow. So because of our ability to produce this. We were on a live recently, and I mentioned a run that I did at Kempton Park, only a 10k run. At the time I was wearing a CGM for testing purposes. My blood glucose was incredibly low, something like 3.6 by memory. I may be wrong with that, but it was ridiculously low. I remember it was technically in hypoglycemic state. Yeah. To a normal person, but obviously we're adapted. The body uses ketones, so I wasn't actually in this state, but my blood glucose levels were low. When I ran this race, my blood glucose was like something like 10.6. It was double figures, 10.2, whatever. It was in double figures. Massive hypoglycemia. But when you compare this to a carb athlete that's consuming carbs, who I did, there was a gentleman there, I can't remember if he was type 2 or type 1, but he had his CGM on. We compared before and after. Despite consuming lots of carbs prior, his blood glucose was lower. So his had come down and mine had gone up. Yeah. Now, I hadn't consumed any carbs. Yeah. So this was proof positive to me that my body had made glucose or glycogen at a massive level in order to allow me to perform, if that's even what we need to do, and that's open for debate also. Yeah. So we make glucose. Now, when people say that sugar or glucose is essential, it is. There are 2 cells in the human body that are essential. They need glucose. The erythrocyte, or the red blood cell, and the glutaminergic neurotransmitters in the brain. And the reason for this is they do not have mitochondria, and only mitochondria can use ketones for fuel. So they need other means for energy. So they'll achieve this through GLUT1 and GLUT3 transporters, which are glucose independent, which means they don't need, insulin independent, which means they don't need insulin to open up the gate, if you like, to allow them to use glucose for fuel. There are other areas of the brain that are insulin dependent that use the GLUT4 transporter. So we need insulin for these to allow us to use energy. But my point to this is that we create this insulin response, we create glucose without consuming any carbohydrate. Our requirement for exogenous carbohydrate is 0. We don't need to consume any from an exogenous source. We make all of the glucose that we need.
And that process harks back to why carnivore is also good for fat loss, because we can take the triacylglyceride that we have stored, take the backbone, the glycerol backbone, turn it into glucose, and then burn it off. And so we are actually able to burn more fat by having no carbs, because otherwise you would burn the carbs first, right?
Yeah. So look, there's a number of factors to this. So if we look at it from a caloric perspective, it can't be the calories. It's the endocrine system that governs whether we gain or lose weight. So if we consume carbohydrate, we elicit an insulin response, and insulin tells the body to store fat through that mechanism that we mentioned earlier. So that's one thing. The other factor to this is the lectins also. So we've mentioned that the lectins will prevent the absorption of other nutrients. The lectins do lots of other things. They cause intestinal permeability, which we'll get into later. But also what they do is they bind to insulin receptors, and they can signal a 5 times high insulin response. So at a basic, and this is incredibly basic and simplistic, but if we were to consume 500 calories from a bowl of muesli, compared to 500 calories from bacon and eggs, we could potentially cause a 5 times higher insulin response from the muesli than we would from the bacon and eggs, which potentially means our bodies store 5 times more fat. So the caloric model doesn't account for lectins. So now we've hit the insulin response. We've hit a secondary insulin response from the lectins. There's a third area in regards to where the lectins prevent the absorption of other nutrients, because when we're not absorbing enough nutrients, we need to consume more nutrients, which leads to overeating, which is why we gain more weight again. The lectins also block leptin, which is a hormone that tells us that we're full. So without hitting that, having that response, it can lead to over-consuming. Protein has a high thermic effect, which basically means that 25 to 35% of the calories in there are used to process the protein, which means that if we were to look at a standard diet of 70% of calories from carb, if we were to turn that on its head and consume 70% of our calories from protein, purely through that increase in thermic effect, we could lose the equivalent of 2 to 3 stone per year just by doing that without changing the caloric value. So this is why it cannot be calories. There are other factors involved with this as well, that fats will increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which makes us, again, feel full. It aids with inhibitory control, so it allows us to abstain from doing certain things. It increases other parts of the brain.
I've had patients who have come to me with health issues. Let's take my obesity patients. So they've come to me because they want to get on things like Ozempic and Manjaro, Wegovy, all these sorts of things. Almost never use them. Very, 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 very rarely in extreme circumstances do I reach for that tool. But many times these patients, I get them, I change the diet and I say, look, ultimately, we want you to go as close as possible to this type of diet. And when you're there, when it comes to the meat, there's actually no limit. You can eat as much as you want. And very commonly, I get asked, well, if I can eat loads and loads, won't I just put loads of weight on? I say, no, absolutely not. And I talk about things like the thermic effect, the fact that insulin, so you're not going to try and store all the fat. And very, very easily, these patients, before we have actually introduced them to the gym, just by going towards that direction, the weight just falls off. Yeah. It's very, very easy. I think fat loss is much easier on carnivore because you don't have to straight away introduce the gym. It will actually happen automatically without having to do things like interval training, as an example, to really burn the fat off. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, 100%. It is. Look, you try gaining weight by living a carnivore lifestyle. It's incredibly difficult. And I'm not saying it's impossible, because at some point, that energy value does need to be taken into account. But we do have a room or a buffer, if you like, when we're ketogenic, because what happens is when we're in a ketogenic state, so when we're in a state of low insulin, elevated glucagon, this increases the activity of uncoupling protein 1, UCP1. This basically signals our white fat cells, which want to store energy, to become uncoupled and burn fat in the way the brown fat does. So brown fat wants to burn energy, waste energy. White fat wants to store it. When we're born with predominantly brown fat. As we age, we store predominantly white fat. So telling our white fat stores to become uncoupled and just to burn and waste energy. So you and I are sitting at this table. We are quite literally burning fat. We're breathing out fat, and when we go to the toilet, we're peeing out fat. In essence.
And there's heat as well.
And heat. Yeah. So this allows, what better term, wiggle room, if you like.
Yeah.
And it is different for everyone. But this is why if you and I were to consume more for the next month or two in a caloric value, to say maybe 500 calories, we may not even gain any more weight.
Yeah.
We need to push and push and push that to start gaining the weight. And the opposite is also true, So if we stick to a set amount of calories for set period and then we drop it, then we may not burn, for a little while because of this wiggle room. But it basically does allow us to consume far more from a visual perspective and a caloric perspective than we would on carbohydrate. I eat a lot.
Yeah, same.
Hell of a lot. And I'm not in the shape I used to be, but
you're not exactly obese either.
I'm not obese.
Yeah.
And I eat unlimited. So I don't track anything.
Neither do I.
I don't track any macro at all. If you like to track, we can get into that. But, I don't think you need to. I eat when I'm hungry. If I'm not hungry, I don't eat. And what I've learned recently is to stop when I'm full.
Yeah.
So I think we live...
Only recently.
Yeah. So, we live in a society in which we're told to clear our plates, and I know it's different, with different regions all over the world. But, in the UK, if you finish your plate, then that's a good sign to the person who has made you that food. If you go to a restaurant and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Other cultures, leave some to show that we've been fed enough. But in the UK, that seems to be, the general sort of way of thinking. And I've always cleared my plate and anyone else's, so I like to eat. But what I've learned recently is that halfway through my meal, I'll stop now because I'm feeling full.
Yeah.
Now all of these senses and triggers are being elicited and it's allowing me to recognize these signals. I'll stop eating. I'll cover it up. I'll put it to one side. I'll pop it in the fridge or maybe chuck it in the oven or whatever while the oven's off. And I'll go back to it later when I am hungry and I'll consume it there. I've got no problem with eating cold meat. But that's important. So I eat when I'm hungry. If I'm not hungry, I don't eat. I listen to these satiety signals, but I do eat an awful lot, way more than when I was calorie counting, where I couldn't lose any weight. So this isn't a diet.
Yeah.
This is about feeding the body the nutrients that it needs to heal and repair. If we look at the human body, if we look at the average mammalian cell within the human body, and we look at the proportions of the compounds that make up that cell, 70% of the cell is water. So let's take that out of the equation. We're left with 30%. 18%, so over half of what's left, is protein. Then it drops down a little to lipid, which is around 5%. Only 2% of the average cell makes up polysaccharide or sugar. So a very small percent. And the rest of the percentage is things like DNA and minerals and so on and so forth. But only 2% of that cell is sugar. Why are we consuming 70% of our energy from sugar? It just doesn't make sense.
Agree.
From an evolutionary perspective, we would have consumed these compounds coming into a winter period. This is why fruit, typically in the UK, comes into season at the end of summer in order to fatten us up for a cold winter. Now, the argument from many would be that years ago, the average lifespan was a lot lower, but it wasn't realistically. If we remove the factor of the deaths of young children, basically. So if we remove the factor of infants who die during the Paleolithic period and concentrate on people who would survive, because remember, they didn't have central heating, they didn't have medications, they didn't have antibiotics. We were hunted by other animals. When we factor that in, the average lifespan was between 70 to 80 years of age.
Yeah.
That is incredibly comparative to today. Now, bear in mind, no central heating. We lived out in the wilds or in caves, hunted by other animals, open to viruses, infections. We're open to the elements. So that is heavily comparative to modern day. If we were to adopt that way of living, and the reason that I say we don't account for the younger carcasses is that open to the elements, this is where we're at our most vulnerable, and this is why most of us, would die early on. But when we look at the average lifespan for the Paleolithic period, it accounts for those deaths also. But excluding those, beyond infancy, the average lifespan was like 70 to 80 years of age.
Even back then, they still became parents and grandparents.
Exactly.
It's not exactly a fringe science to say that. We know that for a fact because we can measure the bones. We can see all the information about these guys.
Yeah, 100%.
When you're on carnivore, I think I know the answer to this, but do you try and aim for particular amounts of particular nutrients to make sure you've got everything?
So, in regards to vitamins and minerals?
Yeah.
No. And the reason being is animal proteins contain every single vitamin and mineral. Look, and everything I'm saying to you, you know this, and
please go for
in
it,
way more depth. But for the sake of the listeners, I mean, let's look at vegetables. Now, I was a big believer that vegetables were the magic elixir, this magical unicorn compound that contained everything that we need. Whenever we're sick, we consume certain compounds. And that I agree with to a degree, because I believe that these compounds are there to be made into medications, if you like. And if it wasn't for these medications, at some points through our evolutionary period, we wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for medication, I wouldn't be here. So I'm not against medication. So I don't want people to think that I'm completely anti, the medical profession, because there is a place for this and it is important. But when we look at plants, they're not as nutrient dense as we're led to believe. And let's break this down one by one. Vitamin A does not exist in plants. So when I was growing up, my mother, during a Sunday dinner, would tell me to eat your carrots so you can see in the dark. Now, there is some sort of truth to this, because the true form of vitamin A is retinol.
Not beta-carotene.
Not 100%. Yeah. Beta-carotene is the compound found in vegetables. Beta-carotene is not vitamin A. It's not the active form of retinol. Beta-carotene needs to be acted upon by an enzyme called BCMO in order to convert it into the active form. And to do so, it's depleted by over 20 times, meaning the amount converted is incredibly small. So you're not going to get high quantities of vitamin A from vegetables. Vitamin A found in abundance in animal proteins in its true form of retinol. B vitamins, niacin, pyridoxine, vitamin B12, cobalamin, folate, B9. We can get folate from vegetables, but everything else, B12, cobalamin, does not exist in vegetables. B12 does not exist whatsoever.
And can we just address this idea that if you eat veg, you get adequate B12 as long as there's dirt on the outside? Have you heard that one?
Yeah.
What would you say to people with that argument?
It's utter rubbish. It's, you probably know a little bit more about this than I do, but you cannot get B12 from plants whatsoever, irrespective of what we've been told. B12 can only be found in the form of cobalamin from animal proteins. Do you want to go into more detail in regards to the dirt?
Well, I think let's pretend that's true for a second. This is a game I like to play with people. What else are you getting in that dirt? Because we're not designed to eat dirt at the end of the day. There's a reason it's dirt. And it's not a taste we like. So my argument is, even if it's true, why would you eat dirt? And why would you try and eat enough dirt to have B12? It makes no sense. And when you look at the fact that it's in animal protein, you get so many other things in that which you don't get from a supplement or from dirt either. So for me, there was just no argument whatsoever, and it's meant to be taken from animal protein, which I'm sure we both agree with.
Yeah.
Even vitamin C, for instance, I think. Well, you tell me. People argue that vitamin C is not found in meat. What would you say to that?
Another fallacy. So it was always presumed to be zero.
Yeah.
But let's come back to B1, B3, B6. All of the B vitamins at best have trace amounts in vegetables. But most have zero. So we can't get B vitamins. B9, we can from vegetables, but folate, which is another argument when we speak to a vegan and vegetarian, folate is found in high quantities in eggs. So there's no excuse. It's in everything that we consume. So vitamin C. Now, if we look at citrus fruits are high in vitamin C, fantastic. Kale actually contains more vitamin C per 100 grams than citrus fruits. By memory, and I may be wrong with this, but I think it's around 93 milligrams per 100 grams, which I think citrus fruits is like 70 to 80. So kale is higher in vitamin C. The issue with these compounds is that they contain other compounds called flavonoids. Now, flavonoids are endocrine disruptors, and they also prevent the absorption of vitamin C. So the flavonoids prevent the body from absorbing much of the vitamin C that is found within that compound. So close to zero is converted. And this doesn't account for the fact that when we cook it, that 93 milligrams becomes 20 milligrams. So it's massively reduced before we even consume it. And again, with the flavonoids, which are blocking the absorption, which can lead to a net gain in protein utilization, a negative. So it blocks our body's ability for protein utilization without this vitamin C. The flavonoids are highly toxic in that respect, in being an endocrine disruptor. And we can get into some of these as we go in regards to broccoli later on. But so the amount of vitamin C that we're actually obtaining is very low anyway from plants. Now, we could argue the opposite with citrus fruits, but let's look at a piece of beef. A 12-ounce steak will contain, and the reason I work at this one in ounces, because it's always easier for me to remember, roughly 12 ounces of beef will contain 12 milligrams of vitamin C. Beef liver, I think, is around 24, 25 milligrams per 100 grams. But many of these animal proteins contain vitamin C. Now, the interesting thing with vitamin C is the vitamin C competes for absorption through that GLUT4 transporter that we mentioned earlier. So if we imagine a cell that just had a channel opened up and we've got glucose and vitamin C coming in, they're competing for absorption. So much of this vitamin C isn't being absorbed.
Yeah.
So when we go low carb, our requirement for vitamin C becomes low because we have less competition going on. We've got no competition with glucose. So our requirement for vitamin C becomes far less. So we need far less vitamin C to obtain, to be fit and healthy. And we know this through things like the Napoleonic War. If we look at soldiers who suffered with scurvy, they were fed dead horse meat in order to cure scurvy. I've been living this lifestyle for a long time. You know, you're a dental professional. I've never suffered with scurvy. I don't eat any plants anymore. I don't eat any form of vitamin C from a plant or from fruit. Yet I don't suffer with scurvy, and we see this across the board with every ketogenic and carnivore person.
Yeah, it's a big myth, right?
It is.
I mean, I've got a video coming about this soon, but glucose and vitamin C structurally, in terms of the atomic structure, are very, very similar. And that's why they're both trying to use the same gate. And so that's why you've got this competition that you very rarely talk about. People will argue that there's other ways for vitamin C to get into the cell. Yes, technically, you can use SVCTs, sodium-dependent vitamin C transporters, but that's only for reduced vitamin C. When vitamin C goes through GLUT4, that is the dehydroascorbic acid. And it has to be that because it's oxidized in the process of eating it. And so if you're eating it with carbs, exactly like you said, what are you going to absorb? And something I always try to talk about with people who argue against carnivore is, or they say, look at all the antioxidants and the nutrients. Okay, but number one, what else is in there in anti-nutrients in terms of the bad stuff? And even if there is good stuff, how much of it are you actually getting? And this is exactly one of those reasons. So you've got to question how much you're getting, I think. In terms of the recovery on carnivore, obviously you mentioned that all these nutrients you don't have to worry about, and it's helping you win these competitions. What about after you've trained? Do you think that people on carnivore are going to recover, let's say, better, however you want to define better, compared to a standard American diet or Western diet? And if so, why?
Yeah, for sure. Look, let's run quickly through the rest of those vitamins really quickly. Vitamin D, not found in plants. Vitamin D is found in animal proteins. Vitamin E, yes, we can get from plants, but we can get higher quantities from animal proteins. Vitamin K does not exist in plants in human form. Plants contain vitamin K1, human body needs vitamin K2. We need to convert this K1 into K2. The process is so inefficient, again, close to zero is converted. If you were to pick up a pack of kale in the supermarket, it has a little stamp on it that says, good source of vitamin K. Yeah, but it's the wrong vitamin K. Yeah. So it's not the type of vitamin K that the human body needs. And what else is there? There's creatine, choline, carnitine, carnosine, all of these things.
All in meat.
All in meat. Yeah. So quite literally, every vitamin and mineral is found in high quantities in animal proteins. Very few of these compounds are found in vegetables. Now, when we see somebody gravitate into a vegan lifestyle and they say, it's changed my life, the reason for this, I think, is because they've started removing processed foods.
Agree.
They've changed their lifestyle. They're making better habits. They hit the gym.
It's not hard to be better than the standard Western diet.
Exactly. You don't have to. So being a vegan is healthier, in my opinion, than a standard diet.
Yeah, same.
So, that's a step in the right direction. Many of the people that I know who are carnivore today were ex-vegan. So they've gone down this rabbit hole. They've consumed the vegetables. They felt incredible. They've made lifestyle changes. They start hitting the gym, practicing yoga, grounding, stretching. Once you start doing all these things, it opens up this cascade of events that allows us to be healthier in spite of and not because of. So it's because of all of the processed foods you've removed, not because you're eating these vegetables. But what happens is 4 to 5 years down the line, you start to suffer with lack of vitamin B12 because B12 is stored in the liver, along with other fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K. These things are stored in the liver. But when vitamin B12 stores are used up, and they can store for a long time, now we start to suffer with problems because B12 is essential for life. Yeah. It's essential to create neurotransmitters. It's essential for methylation. We can't methylate efficiently without B12. So this is why many of them need to take vitamin B12 supplements. Iron, for example. Now, iron, Popeye was wrong. Iron does not. It does exist in spinach, but it's not in a usable form. It's tightly bound to oxalate in spinach, and we can't access that. So the human body needs heme iron. Heme iron can only be found in animal proteins. So that's another issue. So we start to not obtain enough iron from our diet. Iron is important for thyroid function and many other things. It's and we can get into that. But coming back to your original question, I've got off on a tangent. Apologies. I tend to do this a lot.
It's all right. We have the time for this here.
Just crack the whip. So look, I mean, for a start, when we consume animal proteins, we're obtaining every single vitamin and mineral that we need, not just to survive, but thrive. But then if we look at the recovery after, what are we doing? We're putting in these carbs that contain these anti-nutrients, which are blocking the absorption of these nutrients. We're not consuming it with the fat. And again, coming back to the reason that I was able to build the muscle quicker, I'm not consuming these anti-nutrients.
Yeah.
The plants consume lots of anti-nutrients. You mentioned there about antioxidants, which are in fact pro-oxidants, and I'm sure you'd agree. And we can get into that. But these compounds are not as good for us as we're led to believe. We don't want this so-called antioxidant response from plants because it is not an antioxidant response. But when we remove the plant compounds and we're consuming a wholly animal-based lifestyle, we're getting all of the amino acids, we can perform muscle protein synthesis better. Now, if you were to speak to the typical bodybuilder and ask them to explain muscle protein synthesis, I'd be curious as to what they would say.
I would.
Because I don't think they understand the process of muscle protein or any protein synthesis.
Or even contraction of muscle.
Yeah.
And what fuels it.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much that I believe that they don't understand in regards to these mechanisms that they claim to be looking into. But when we look at protein synthesis comes from DNA. I'm sure they don't even know that for a start. But what happens is we copy strands of DNA and we send it as mRNA from the nucleus to the ribosome in order to create new strands of proteins. So in simplistic terms, when we consume animal proteins, these animal proteins are broken down into amino acids, and these amino acids then through this process are reconstituted into human proteins. And they constitute into specific orders to perform certain tasks like muscle protein synthesis.
Each one's a recipe for a different enzyme, right? Or
exactly.
Different protein.
So they're coupled in something called a codon. And the codons go through this mechanism in which the transport RNA, spot on, it comes in and that signals which codon is going to attach to and which strand of amino acids that the next amino acid binds to. And when these all bind together, then we have this DNA. Now, that is protein synthesis. This is how we create protein. So when we talk to the average bodybuilder about muscle protein synthesis, well, it just makes muscles big, isn't it? That's
yeah, it is.
That's the answer that we get. But DNA is made up of lots of compounds which are specific to the foods that we eat. So plants, for example, contain polyphenols, lots of flavonoids, lots of other compounds that cause clastogenesis. Now, clastogenesis is the rearrangement or deletion of chromosomes. Now, the chromosomes make up our DNA. So if we're consuming these plant compounds, how is that going to be beneficial for muscle protein synthesis or any protein synthesis. It can't be. If we are deleting our DNA, it's absolutely counterintuitive.
And I think things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, probably some of the worst, right?
Yeah.
Some of the most clastogenic compounds we can have.
Yeah. Broccoli, we consume because we're told that they have these anti-carcinogenic properties.
And it's only because of that, because it tastes horrible.
We're not meant to eat it, and we know this intuitively as a child. But the reason that we're told that broccoli is a superfood is because it contains a compound called sulforaphane. Well, in fact, it doesn't. It doesn't contain sulforaphane.
Glucoraphanin, right?
Yeah, spot on. So glucoraphanin binds to myrosinase during the chewing process, and this creates the isothiocyanate sulforaphane. Now, this is created during the chewing process, i.e. when the plant is under attack. We are the predator. This compound is a defense chemical. All plants contain defense chemicals. I can run away or fight back. You can run away or fight back. Every animal on the planet can either run away or fight back. A plant is rooted to the ground. And this may shock many people who are listening, but every plant contains phytoalexins, defense chemicals to harm or kill a predator, because that plant wants to survive. Plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race, if you like, for survival.
Yeah.
So that's the defense mechanism. This sulforaphane or sulforaphane, however you want to pronounce it, some people on the internet, what's the word we're looking for? Influencers will push sulforaphane as being this magic elixir to help fight cancer.
What's a load of nonsense.
Yeah. And look, I can understand why they say it, because
I do. Yeah.
It can fight off. It's used in the treatment for cancer. So it's chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Chemotherapy fights cancer. Chemotherapy kills every cell in the body. Not just, I'm not saying every cell in one.
I know what you mean, yeah.
But it attacks every cell.
You can't control where it's working and where it's not working. And I think sulforaphane in that kind of context, you are controlling the deployment of sulforaphane.
Yeah.
That is very different to eating broccoli and it entering your systemic circulation.
Exactly. So we are consuming this compound to fight a cancer. If you do not have cancer, why are you eating broccoli?
Yeah.
Now, sulforaphane or sulforaphane, however you want to pronounce it.
I don't even know.
There's so many different ways. The Americans pronounce it differently again, don't they? But, these compounds, these isothiocyanates, they compete for absorption of iodine at the thyroid, which leads to goitrogens. So this is the main cause of goitrogens. One, not enough iodine in the diet, and two, any iodine you are consuming is blocked by these isothiocyanates. So this is how toxic these compounds are. But what they also do is they activate the NRF2 pathway, and we spoke about this during the live.
Tell the viewers in lay terms what the NRF2 pathway is. I don't think most people would have heard of it.
So the NRF2 pathway is a pathway that's activated as a pro-oxidant response, in simple terms. So the reason that we see it to confer a benefit, if you like, is we consume this compound, it elicits this response through said pathway, and then it activates an increase in glutathione, the body's master antioxidant. So what we see when we look at these papers is an elevation in glutathione. Fantastic. Well, brilliant. It's elevating glutathione. This must be a positive effect. The reason glutathione has been elevated is to conjugate to that toxin. So glutathione is trying to excrete. Basically, this pathway has been elicited through a pro-oxidant response, not a antioxidant response. And these are two very different things. So when we do this and we elicit that response, we believe that it's causing. And if you Google this, you will see that all antioxidants first pro-oxidants. I mean, this is known. If we look at this on any search engine, any of these compounds will first elicit a pro-oxidant response. But we're told that this is puts us into a state of, or a hormetic response, hormesis.
Stress.
A stress response.
Yeah.
So you've just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
We're eliciting a stress response to fight off something that shouldn't be there. Now, when this happens, the whole thinking behind it, the whole premise is that we've elicited this hormetic response and we confer a benefit through putting something bad in. Now, hormesis does exist. Training is hormesis. A little stress and we grow.
Yeah.
Being in an environment, so cold water dipping, red light therapy, ketogenic. And the reason ketogenic is environmental is because we do not need to eat anything, So in a state of no food, we become ketogenic.
Yeah.
So for me, it's environmental. None of these overexpress this pathway, the NRF2 pathway. Now, what happens is when we consume these compounds is that it's turmeric, for example. Turmeric is not your friend. Contrary to popular belief, turmeric is toxic to the body. It's very high in oxalate. This expresses that NRF2 pathway. Now, when it does that, the body tries to excrete it very quickly through phase 2 detoxification in the liver. So phase 1, through the cytochrome P450 family, we bind or convert these toxins from fat-soluble molecules into water-soluble, which allow it to pass on to through glucuronidation into phase 3 of liver detoxification. Basically, when we consume these compounds, the liver tries to excrete it as a toxin. Now, what happens is we add pepper to our mixes, and every brand on the market that sells turmeric also adds in pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine. Piperine blocks UDP glucuronyl transferase, which is the enzyme that is used to conjugate, to excrete that toxin from the body. It blocks that pathway, and therefore our body's ability to excrete the toxin, which is why it stays in the body. But it's activated this NRF2 pathway. Now, the NRF2 pathway is the same pathway that's elicited if we consume lead, mercury, arsenic, tobacco smoke, cyanide. The exact same pathway.
Yeah.
So if we consume lead, we will have the same response as consuming turmeric.
Yeah.
How can one be beneficial when they both elicit the same pathway? Now, what people will say is, well, I've taken turmeric and it's helped with inflammation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it can do, because the NRF2 pathway will also activate another pathway, which is the NF-κB pathway. So the NF-κB pathway can elicit an anti-inflammatory response through NLRP3 inflammasome. So I'm conscious I'm throwing lots of letters and words.
Go for it.
But basically, this NR2 activation elicits another response that will activate an anti-inflammatory response. But the overexpression of... So in short, from a medicinal purpose, if you had an injury, turmeric in short term can confer a benefit. But you can't consume it constantly. That doesn't address the root cause.
Yeah.
And this is what medications do. Medications look at a symptom. They don't look at addressing the root cause. So if you want to take turmeric in the short term, then that can help with inflammation because of this NF-κB activation. But overexpression of NF-κB also leads then to increased cytokine response, inflammatory cytokines. So
interleukins, all sorts.
Spots on. Yeah. Lots. There's a list. Like
NF-κB is probably probably the most connections to anything in terms of that kind of response, right? It's massive.
Yeah, huge.
And I think it's pretty safe to say we don't fully understand it. No one knows it to extreme detail. So the people that argue that turmeric is good, there's no evidence.
No.
There's no evidence that you understand all of it. And I think people talk about the extracts in turmeric, curcumin, if I'm assuming I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between an extract and turmeric.
Yes, but just to jump in there really quickly, so I don't mean to jump.
No, please.
Curcumin. So when we come back to the detoxification in the liver, the P450 cytochrome family, curcumin inhibits that process. That stops phase 1. So piperine blocks phase 2, and curcumin in its natural form will inhibit the cytochrome P450 family.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there's this whole connection. And look into phase 1, 2, and 3 detoxification in the liver. Phase 3 is just as it passes out of the body. But when you look into that, it's elicited through a drug response, basically, through putting in a compound that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So the fact your body's eliciting this response tells you that we shouldn't be consuming these compounds. Now, oxalates.
Yeah.
You've got me off for one, apologies. But
no, please. If people want to know about oxalates, yeah.
So oxalates are incredibly damaging to the human body. Turmeric per 100 grams contains an awful lot of oxalate. Now, I am conscious that we wouldn't be consuming, so there are other compounds that would cause more problems. But these oxalates, if we look at the way that the body makes, so oxalate is something that isn't used in the human body. So through the glyoxylate pathway, it's waste product of the production and usage of certain proteins. It's not a compound that we use, so it has no use in the human body. We would typically produce and excrete maybe 10 to maybe 40 milligrams of oxalate per day. So incredibly small amount. Now, if we look at a pack of spinach, spinach contains oxalate.
A lot as well.
A lot of oxalate. Now, oxalates can kill. And I'm not exaggerating. And you can Google this, any search engine. As little as 3,000 milligrams of oxalate has been known to cause death. There have been a number of 4,000 milligrams linked to death. 15,000 milligrams of oxalate will kill you in an instant. Whether it's instantly, but it will kill you.
Yeah.
15,000 milligrams is toxic to the human body. Yes, that's a lot of oxalate. The average pack of spinach in the UK comes in 200 grams. The average, and this depending on which batch you test, and I've seen numbers varying from 200 milligrams to like 800 milligrams. So let's go up the higher end, and I am conscious that this is on the higher end, but if we assume 700 to 800 milligrams per 100 grams, then a pack of spinach is around 15 to 1600 milligrams. That is half the amount that has been known to cause death. Half of the amount. When I was making my spinach, kale, turmeric smoothies,
tell us.
I would put a full pack of spinach in.
My God.
I would add turmeric, black pepper. I used to make other things with apples, and we'll get into cyanogenic glycosides also if you want to. But that was a perfect storm of toxins that I was putting into my body to elicit the response. And as I said earlier, I was still healthier and fitter than I'd ever been, but I was healthier and fitter in spite of, not because of. Yeah. So it's not because I was consuming those compounds, it's because of all of the other changes.
Which was like a Band-Aid for the toxins in those things. You mentioned to me a while ago that you have a friend, I've forgotten the name, who came to you once as a vegan. He's now a carnivore, and he's now the #1 Ironman athlete in Europe. Could you tell me a little bit about, first of all, his name, obviously, and I'd like you to talk about what kind of changes he himself has personally felt from that switch in that context.
Yeah, fantastic. So Mikey Davis is the gentleman in question.
I'd love to get him on here, actually. If you ever let him know, I'd love to interview him.
Most definitely. Yeah. So I was introduced to Mikey because he's a chiropractor. So when I gravitated into running, I was suffering with lower back issues from carrying the excess weight. And this was the reason that I stopped bodybuilding, by the way, because I started to suffer with lower back pain. When I became big for my frame, which wasn't big, but it was too big for me, I started to suffer with problems. So that's one of the reasons that I came away from bodybuilding. But I was doing a presentation. I was given a presentation at a local athletic club, the club that I now run with, which is the Ferry Flatliners. Small club, all amateur athletes, but we just love the sport. So Mikey came to that. Now Mikey runs for another club. He was already recognized as the best local athlete, but he was vegan. So credit where it's due. He came off, whichever pedestal he was on, and thought, well, I'm going to go and listen to what this guy has to say.
That's rare.
It is. And do you know, it's this is why, and for any budding athlete, this is why he is #1, because he is open to suggestion. He will listen to everything you've got to say. He'll go away and think about it. He'll go away and research it. He may even try it. And then he will make his own decision. He won't be governed by the current way of thinking from
dogma.
Exactly, yeah. So he came to this event and we discussed, I went through the presentation, was on athletic performance. This is a talk that I've given with Anthony Chafee. So that's available on his channel and mine also. But we look into why a carnivore athlete is better. And there's lots and lots of reasons. I think the talk went on for 1.5 to 2 hours. So it's jam-packed full of information. Yeah. So Mikey came to this. He watched the presentation, and there were lots of people after, as you can, you're familiar with, after the event, lots of questions. So you're there for a hell of a long time after, which is brilliant. This is why we do these events. So Mikey was there, and he came up to me, he said, "Rich, can I talk to you privately?" I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And I didn't really know him at this point. I think, had I used him as a chiropractor? It was around that time. I don't know if it was before or after. I might have started using him before. Not important. Anyway, he said, "Look, where can I buy good quality grass-fed beef liver?" And I thought, wow, like this guy who was a vegan, a strict vegan, but he was a healthy vegan.
Yeah.
And by healthy, I mean, he wasn't just eating non-animal compounds. He was eating at least real food in, whatever context.
None of this processed fake meat crap.
Yeah. So, he was what I'd call a healthier vegan. And he said, look, my performance has started to dip. I don't feel as good as I did. And you mentioned about, the vitamin B12 stores and the iron. Look, I'm thinking of giving this a try. And he adopted including more animal proteins. So at this time, even though he was one of the best local athletes, he had never podiumed in an event. He was always like 4th or 5th. But, these events, you get people from all over the world coming in. So 2 years later, I believe, so he'd been on the journey for well over a year, and we were touching base, consultations, he was coming to see me, we built up a good relationship. I now train with Mikey. So my claim is that I train with this guy, the number one, as an amateur athlete, I might add, by the way, he's not professional. He could be, and that is the goal. But as an amateur athlete, and if you look at how many amateur athletes are in the world, you'll be incredibly shocked. It's a sport that is blown up big time. You're talking thousands and thousands of people who are elite, and I'm talking, they can run like 1 hour, 10 half marathons after, swimming 2.4 miles and riding 112 miles on a bike.
So when did Mikey switch from vegan to accepting non-vegan ideas?
So I think the switch was there.
In terms of year?
So he took a year to become what I'd class as more carnivore.
Okay.
So he started implementing more, he tried the organ meats initially. I don't know if he kept them in the short term, but he still uses them now. He started putting in more eggs and cheese. So we gravitated slowly.
Yeah.
But he instantly felt better.
Wow. In what way? What is it that he noticed about his body?
Mental clarity, energy. It was easier to stay lean.
And how long had he been vegan for up to this point?
A number of years.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to say just in case I'm wrong, but...
I'll ask him when he comes on the show.
Yeah. A number of years.
Yeah.
And he was a big flagship, if you like, for the vegan community because of his athletic attributes. But he's now carnivore.
Yeah.
And I say that in a fairly loose sense because he will still consume little bits that, maybe berries now and again. Cheese, which, some would deem not to be. I eat cheese.
Yeah.
Eggs and 4 is iron. So he's done a number of competitions recently. And I think it's important to say this for full disclosure. So the first competition that he ever won was the European Championship. Now, the European Championship is invitation. You have to qualify for it. So you have to be of a certain standard to get there. You and I couldn't just romp up and do this. Okay. So the best in the world are at these events. For anybody listening who understands figures, he's a sub 9 hour, what is he? He's a sub 10 hour Ironman finisher around, Wales, which is known to be a super tough course. The 70.3 in Europe that he competed in recently, which is half Ironman, he did in just over 4 hours. So he's going to the World Championships now in Kona, which again is invitation. So he's qualified for that. And we have the goal of a sub 9 hour Ironman.
Wow.
Most people you see who complete Ironman are doing it in 14, 15, 16, and that's fantastic.
You're kidding me.
Yeah. So
he's that much quicker.
Yeah.
And so before Carnivore, I'm guessing he was nowhere near that performance.
So he's always been a very good athlete. So yeah. I'm not taking that.
As in comparing to his performance now, he wasn't at this level when he was vegan.
So let's put this into perspective. So when he was vegan, his times on certain races, comparative to when he was carnivore, they have now increased by 12%. So he's 12% better this year than he was, 2 years. In fact, it was last year we looked at the 12%. He's improved again because he still wasn't winning comps at that point.
Wow.
So there was a competition. There are other factors involved. There's wind and all sorts of... But his time... So he went from placing, basically, in these comps to winning. So one of the comps he did recently, after winning the European Championship, he came... So his first comp he ever won was the European Championship.
Yeah.
Amazing. He came back less than a week. He competed in a local competition to be in Port Talbot. And he won this by like over 12 minutes. And he said, I didn't really push.
He won by 12 minutes and he wasn't pushing.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's not an advert for Carnivore, I don't know what is.
Yeah. So, the guy's an animal. Like, I go running with him and cycling with him, and like, I'm trying to hang on his back wheel, fighting for my life. And this is how he rides for like, we do this for an hour and a half. He does this for like 5 hours, pushing out stupid amounts of watts. He's an absolute animal. But he's improved that much that he's gone on to not finishing on the podium, to now winning these competitions by some margin. So we've set the goal for a sub 9 hour. If we achieve Kona in less than 9 hour 20, I believe, we'll have either the Welsh or British record. I can't remember which. And
good luck to him and you. That'd be amazing.
Look, I think he's gonna smash that. But we've called it Project Sub 9. Now, the interesting thing with this is, since he's achieved all of these things, he's part of many groups to do with athletic performance and Ironman. Everybody puts in about the requirement for carbohydrate. So
I can guess where this is going.
Yeah, 100%. So he'll go in. People will ask his opinion. He'll go in and say, "Well, I don't use any carbs." People send him laughing emojis back. I don't know if they think he's lying.
Yeah.
He did a bike ride recently, a social training type bike ride, and he was with a group of people, and they stopped halfway, and they were talking, and they'd taken energy gels, and somebody said to him, "What are you using for the trip back? What carb are you using?" And he said, "I don't use carb." And they were like, "You are? You don't need carb." And the whole table just went dead quiet. Right, come on. And then they all went up and went. It's as if they're almost scared, because he is achieving these things that other athletes are unable to achieve. He is achieving these things that he wasn't able to achieve when he was consuming carbohydrate, let alone vegan, but when he was on carbohydrate. Now he's achieving these incredible things. People still don't resign. They won't resign to the fact that there's another way. And this is where I think credit when it's due to Mikey. He came out of his box, listened to the information, tested it, noticed. He spoke to me before. We had loads of chats in regards to the adaptation phase, because there is an adaptation phase, which is really important for listeners to understand if they're not already ketogenic or carnivore. So there was a drop off in performance initially. But every coach he's been working with after, in regards to performance, has tried to incorporate carbohydrate. And so he's coaching himself on that front, and I help with nutrition. But what we did do during the 70.3, we did consume carb. Now, I put that in for full disclosure, but he was consuming like 20 odd grams of carb an hour. The going rate is 100 to 120 gram. Now, all of his training has been done on zero carb. And we took the decision that, can carbohydrate improve athletic performance? And the answer is, like, we don't really know.
Tim Noakes, I think, is probably one of the best people to look at if you're interested in that kind of topic.
100%. Tim has been on my podcast. So for those who don't know, I'm a Noakes ambassador. So I've spoken for the Noakes Foundation a number of times. And when we look into this, again, coming back to the requirement for sugar or glucose, we need as little as 5 grams per hour. Top end is 20. This can be made through that process we mentioned earlier, gluconeogenesis. So we can make all of the glucose we need. So really, our requirement for an exogenous source is null and void. Now, what is up for debate is that when we consume sugar, it is a drug. Drugs can elicit a positive response. They can be stimulants in the same way that caffeine is. So the argument would be that if we put sugar in, it may elicit benefit in regards to the stimulation. Again, that's open for debate. But what isn't open for debate is we do not need muscle glycogen. It's blood glucose that we need. And this was mentioned in the podcast that I did with Professor Noakes. It's the level of blood glucose. The reason that we bonk during these activities is because of low blood glucose. The brain needs glucose, as you mentioned earlier, through the glutaminergic neurotransmitters. So we do need glucose. If our bodies can't create enough, then this is why we bonk. But a carb athlete is not fat adapted. This process of gluconeogenesis isn't as available, if you like. They haven't tapped into being as adapted as you and I have. So, they put the sugar in, and this is what keeps their performance going. But the fact is, at top end, they would only need 20 grams of carb per hour. This whole 100 to 120 grams per hour is utter rubbish, built on false research by the sugar industry in order to sell you an energy gel. They can't sell you 20 grams of sugar because you eat a sweet or something, you know?
Yeah.
So in order to make money, this is where this whole way of thinking has come from. But we sat down and thought, well, is it going to hurt if we put a little bit of sugar in? And the answer is no, because we're completely adapted. You and I can put sugar in. Our bodies will process it very efficiently. You and I now are so adapted that we could probably consume carbs for days and it not cause any problem. What causes a problem initially are the other compounds that are coming along with that sugar. So our bodies can deal with sugar very efficiently. So is 20 grams going to cause a problem? No. Could it confer a benefit? We don't know, but might, quite possibly. So this is why we put it in. But all of his training up to that point, zero carb, and he was achieving all of these numbers on zero carb, and he consumed around 20 grams, I think it was. It may be slightly higher per hour. And I don't even know if it was for the full, it may not even be for the full item.
Was it just like a gel?
What did he take? I think it was a gel. I may be wrong.
Some kind of gel.
I may be incorrect. He may have made something himself. I wanted him to do this without the carb because I knew that he would have made a massive statement.
Yeah.
Zero carb. So, but it takes a break. He's going to Kona, the World Championship.
There's more opportunity.
Yeah. So there's going to be lots of opportunities to test this in other races that aren't so important.
How do people follow Mikey if they're interested to check this out?
So Mikey is on Strava, Mikey Davis.
Is it Davis or IES?
IES.
Okay.
Mikey, Mickey.
Okay.
He's also on Instagram and Facebook. I'm sure you'll find him on there. I went for a run with him recently, and everyone we were passing knew that, Mikey was like a celebrity within... so I mean, he's not big online by any means. He's not online pushing stuff. He doesn't push any agendas. He just tells people what he's doing. He uses some of my products.
Yeah.
He does certain, and he uses CBD from somebody else's company to so he promotes the products he uses. He tells the truth, which is really important. I believe that many professional athletes do not do this.
Well, very interesting you say that, because I'm sure you've seen it. Today is August the 4th. We are in the middle of the Olympics, and I think you know where I'm going with this, but there has been stories in the paper of athletes essentially coming out and saying world-class athletes aren't vegans. And I think what you've just said there hit the nail on the head, especially in contexts like that. I think it was the first day they almost ran out of meat and dairy products.
Wow.
And they had to order some, I think I might be wrong on this, but something like 600 kilos of eggs to meet the demand, or some ridiculous number. I might be exactly wrong on the number, but it was something like that. And I mean, you can't ignore that.
No.
The top athletes in the world are saying we can't function without meat. And I find that extraordinary. I find it hilarious, actually.
It is. Whatever your view is on diet, protein is essential.
Yeah.
And I think every athlete on the planet will attest to this. Yes, there are vegan athletes out there, but they're not ever number one in the world. At least there's no vegan athlete that I know of. There may very well be, because they may be
far and few in between, I think.
I think so.
Some people would say, I might be wrong, one of the Williams sisters, a tennis player, I think one of them is vegan, could be wrong. And I think Lewis Hamilton is still vegan, but I don't think he was vegan on his way to becoming the best ever. They're the only ones I can think of.
Yeah,
frankly, and
he's no longer the best ever.
No, he's being beat by his younger teammate who eats meat. So what a surprise! I know there's more to it than that. Please don't comment on that. But yeah, that's fascinating. And I think what I want to ask a little bit about what kind of supplements that you and Mikey use in training with regards to stuff that you're doing as carnivores. And specifically, I think it's safe to say that you use ketones, exogenous ketones. Could you just briefly, for the layperson, say what a ketone is and why you...
Definitely. Yeah. So look, first and foremost, I haven't come on, you've kindly invited me to come on the podcast. I haven't come on to the podcast to promote products by any means. And
I'm going to stop you for 1 second. That's completely true. And this is unsponsored. However, I have a video which I have prepared for. I've done all the experimentation specifically on Richard's exogenous ketone product, which I have here just in case you guys want to see. I'll leave that there. And I haven't told you this, but the testing that I have done on this product, i.e. blood tests, huge and absolutely extraordinary results. And I do not use anything else now. I won't give you the numbers and I won't give them to you either. I'll let the video play. It will be coming out soon. But you will be shocked at how effective this product is. And it isn't sponsored. I'm giving it a shout out because I genuinely believe in it. There's no affiliate link. I don't work for you. There's no link between me and your company. That is a genuine video that I've got coming up, and it is blood tested. So there's no opinion. It is just hard facts as to how effective that is. Sorry to interrupt, but you carry on.
Fantastic. And thank you. I appreciate
you're welcome.
that. I'm super interested to watch that video. So look, I mean, the first question is, do you need product to become ketogenic carnivore? The answer is no. I sell supplements. And I'm going to tell you, first and foremost, you do not need supplements to be healthy.
I agree.
You do not need supplements. This is all goal dependent. If you look, the takeaway from this, and I'm going to say this before we finish right at the end, if you want to be healthy, there's 3 things you need to remember. 3 words: just eat meat. And it's as simple as this. Okay?
I love that.
Just eat meat. That is the biggest takeaway. And I'm sure we can throw lots of other takeaways in there also. But meat is so important. When we live an evolutionary appropriate diet, again, we receive all of these vitamins and minerals, all of these pathways are upregulated, the neurotransmitters, methylation. And I want to get into the neurotransmitters in regards to my anxiety and depression also, if we have time for that.
Let's do it, yeah.
But look, it's when we become ketogenic, which is elicited through, again, a low insulin state and elevated glucagon, we produce ketones. So if we look at beta oxidation, for example. So let's look at this. I'm going into too much detail with this now.
So ketone is a type of fuel.
It's a type of fuel that's created in a state of low carbohydrate consumption, shall we say.
Yeah.
So all of us have the ability to perform beta oxidation. If we were to look into the cell is the cytoplasm in the cell contains fat. That fatty acetyl will travel through carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1 and 2 in the form of acetylcarnitine, and then we will achieve acetyl-CoA, which enters the citric acid cycle and allows us to produce energy. In simple terms, now if we look at glucose, for example, it's stored in the muscle, what isn't in circulation, and then it goes through a process of glycogenolysis, where it's broken down from the polysaccharide into glucose, and then it's sent to the target cell. And then we need insulin in order to open up that gateway, if you like, for it to enter that process of glycolysis, which is a long-winded process. So fats are our natural fuel, and that's super important to understand. But when we are in the state of beta oxidation, in a state of low insulin, we can further take this process a little bit further on. So this acetyl-CoA can no longer produce gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis, the compound that we mentioned earlier, part of the citric acid cycle, involves oxaloacetate.
I just want to say, by the way, Krebs cycle and citric acid cycle and TCA cycle, you may hear those different terms. They're different names for the same thing.
Yeah, spot on. So for us to be able to perform gluconeogenesis, we need oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate is a compound used in the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle. So when we do this and perform gluconeogenesis, and I may have said that the wrong way around in the beginning, but we use up the oxaloacetate, now we can't perform this task. So the acetyl-CoA builds up and then enters acetoacetate, or becomes acetoacetate through ACAT. And then this acetoacetate will enter HMG-CoA. HMG-CoA is a pathway, dual pathway, that allows us, it's a pathway before the mevalonate pathway, which allows us to create cholesterol, and it's a pathway that allows us to create ketones. So basically, in simple terms, restricting carbohydrate suppresses insulin, allows us to tap into fat burning through the production of ketones. Now, there are 3 different types of ketones: acetone, acetoacetate, and beta-hydroxybutyrate. In the beginning, we start to use these ketones inefficiently, if you like. So
when you say beginning, you mean when you newly enter the carnivore lifestyle?
Yeah, or become ketogenic. No, every one of us has been in this state. We're born in the metabolic state of ketosis. Any athlete who trains to that extent would elicit, they would have produced ketones within their body, but they do so inefficiently. So when we do this, the ketones that are produced initially are acetone and acetoacetate, which are wasted through the breath and through the urine. So when we test on breath monitors and through urine strips, this is what's detected. And that's fantastic. That means that we're burning fat. So we're quite literally, again, breathing out and peeing out fat. But the true adaptation process is when we can tap into beta-hydroxybutyrate. Now, beta-hydroxybutyrate is the creme de la creme of ketones, and this is where we want to be. So when people talk about fat adaptation, we become fat adapted very quickly, but to become keto adapted is when we produce and utilize this ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate. When we do that, we've upregulated the monocarboxylate transporters and the various enzymes, BDH, ACAT, and SCOT, that allow us to utilize the beta-hydroxybutyrate.
So the keto adaptation is essentially getting better at using and utilizing ketones like beta-hydroxybutyrate to be in the state of ketosis, shall we say, or to go into ketosis a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so it is, but we can become ketogenic and still be wasting these ketones. But when we're adapted, we don't waste ketones in the form of acetone and acetoacetate, or at least very little. We make and produce beta-hydroxybutyrate, and we utilize those more efficiently. So basically, the longer that we become, or we resign to becoming ketogenic and carnivore, the more benefits that are conferred. So, and it's done so through the upregulation of that transporters, the monocarboxylate transporters, the MCTs, not to be confused with MCT oil or powder. So this is what that compound is. It's basically the raw compound of beta-hydroxybutyrate. Okay. So now my body produces beta-hydroxybutyrate and at an incredible rate.
Yeah,
I do not need to take that compound for health and well-being. That said, if I take it before an event, it floods my body with ketones, and it allows me to perform at a high level. And we know this because the Tour de France teams who are not ketogenic will take ketones. Jumbo-Visma, the winning Tour de France team, have been seen multiple times consuming ketones. And this isn't a secret. It's there in black and white. I think when they were asked in an interview, do you consume ketones? Their answer was yes, but we don't think they do anything. Well, that's...
Really?
Yeah. So
let's pretend you are ketogenic and you are adapted. You've got a good amount of these transporters, and you are someone who is active, like yourself, who, let's say you're in your bodybuilding peak, or Mikey Davies, or these cyclists. If you take ketones before you work out, how is that going to make your workout better?
So it depends on which sport, or
So let's say it's someone who is just going to the gym to do a workout.
So what I would suggest with this type is, if you were just going for your day-to-day sessions, then your requirement for those isn't there if you were adapted.
Yeah.
And we'll circle back to this now. If you were going for a PB, this will allow you to maximize your performance. So I call these game day ketones. So this is what I've taken prior to coming to speak with you today. It floods my brain with ketones, which basically means that I can pull big words out of the air that I couldn't normally think of.
Yeah.
And it does the same with athletic performance. It upregulates all of these enzymes and pathways, and allows you just to supply superior energy to the body. So you can compete at a higher level.
What do you mean by superior energy?
So if we look, let's take it back to basic levels. If we look at glucose, and what we use glucose for in regards to the electron transport chain, part of the electron transport chain is the conversion of a compound called NAD plus to NADH. It costs the body 4 NAD plus molecules to create the NADH during that process. So that's for one glucose molecule.
Yeah.
For one BHB molecule, it's 1.
Okay.
So the conversion is 400% more efficient. Okay. So we achieve energy far more efficiently. We create energy. The energy is available through ketones a lot more efficiently. Within carbs, it needs to go through this complex process.
Yeah.
Whether we consume them or not. And it's more efficient than beta oxidation or fat burning.
So each fuel that we use, we can measure how good it is at being fuel by looking at the sort of miles per gallon, if you like. And these essentially have a higher miles per gallon is what you're saying.
Yes.
So if you have that, what kind of sport is best to achieve or to get the most out of a product like this?
So I've used ketones for lots of things. I used them when I was bodybuilding. So if I wanted a PB, I'd use the game day ketones. I'd use them for competing and so on and so forth. On an average day, I would still use ketones, but this one contains caffeine. So I wouldn't consume this one. I'd consume another one that I do that doesn't contain caffeine.
Is that the vanilla one?
It's the vanilla and the chocolate
yeah.
and unflavoured.
Yeah.
So I'll drink these on a daily basis for a number of reasons, because ketones help block inflammation. They block that pathway we mentioned earlier, NLRP3 inflammasome. Yeah. So it allows us to heal and repair. Having ketones in your blood after training will increase the kidney's ability to create erythropoietin or EPO, which is what Lance Armstrong was taking while he was at the peak of his career. Now, we do this naturally. This is what stimulates the production of red blood cells. So ketones will stimulate the production of more red blood cells. So for athletic performance, for healing and repairing, ketones are fantastic.
So for athletic performance, to get the benefit of red blood cell production, is that an acute response on the day, or is that something they get from chronic usage of something like this, for want of a better word?
So I would imagine, and I don't know, I would imagine that it's instant, because the ketones don't stay in your body if you take it from an exogenous source for long. I say long. If you were to take this, it'd last maybe 8 hours. If you were running, competing, maybe 2 hours, because you're using more. When you live a carnivore lifestyle, at set times through the day, we'll create more ketones than we would other times. So I should imagine that the effect of ketones is instant. So whether you are long,
I can tell you it's instant from my blood testing.
Perfect.
So if you're interested, that video will be coming soon. Essentially, I took these products, did a blood test at the time of taking them, and then another blood test a while later. And as you can probably expect, something happened. I won't tell you what. And then I thought, well, I'm getting a reading of whatever X is. Does that mean that's on the way up or on the way down, or is it plateaued? I have no idea, because I can't see the pharmacokinetic profile of how it changes over time. So I did a blood test after taking this every 5 minutes, which is a bit extreme. My fingers are still quite numb right now. But stay tuned for that, and you'll see what we're talking about here as to whether it's instant or whether it's prolonged. And it's interesting.
What I'll add to that, circling back, I mean, in regards to when we take the ketones, how quickly the ketones flood the body, that is instant. I think in a very short space of time. So we can flood the body with an exogenous source of ketones very quickly. Whether the benefit of that in regards to healing and again, I mean, I should imagine it is instant. I mean, there's probably pieces of information that I'm forgetting over time, but as far as athletic performance, I use the compound and it works almost straight away. We know that it blocks inflammation quickly. So I guess if we're measuring ketones from that perspective, then I'll wait for your research to come out, but that's my trail of thought there.
What about ketones for fat loss? Do you think there's anything people can do in that arena?
So this is a very tricky subject, because I don't sell magic pills. I don't sell compounds that if somebody comes to see me and they ask me for fat loss advice, the first piece of advice I'll give them is to remove grains and remove seed oils. And we can get into the reasons why.
That's exactly what I do. Day one, I say cut out all seed oils.
And seed oils elicit a higher response in regards to insulin resistance than carbohydrates do. So the biggest bang for your buck in regards to combating insulin resistance in the seed oils, the vegetable oils. This is things like vegetable oil, rapeseed, grapeseed, canola oil, so on and so forth. That's number one. Grains is number two. And I think that's probably the best order. When I do public speaking events, I quite often mention grains because everybody knows what the grains are. But the biggest lever you can pull is the vegetable oil for a number of reasons. But if you would just do those two things, you're going to be healthier, you're going to be fitter, you're going to see fat loss. I educate them into what we've discussed with the insulin response and how we store fat. It's not fat that leads to fat storage. It's that expression again of insulin. So I give advice on nutrition. This is what I wanted to eat. And from a very simplistic view, I'll give them a shopping list, which is a ketogenic shopping list. Predominates animal proteins. I'll recommend that the person consume 3/4 of their nutrients from animal proteins, with 1/4 at most from vegetables. And there's a list of vegetables on this list that they consume. Now, you may be thinking, why are you telling people to eat vegetables when you've just said they're toxic? Now, the reason for this is if I were to say to you, somebody new to this lifestyle, there's a piece of steak, that's all you need to eat.
That's dangerous.
They would walk out the door and they would think, one, I was absolutely mental, and two, it's not sustainable, and three, it could be dangerous. There are situations, I think that people can gravitate straight into carnivore, but I think it should be done through incremental changes personally.
Same.
I myself have done this through incremental changes. Every person that I've worked with seems to sustain this if they do it through incremental changes. When they go like a bull at a gate, they fall off the wagon, they seem to suffer with lots of issues. And there are reasons for this, oxalate detox, these gut microbes die off. And
I think that's one of the biggest reasons, actually, the gut.
Yeah.
Because the gut microbiome can change as quick as 24 hours. And if they're not eating what they're used to eating, they're going to eat you instead.
Yeah.
It's, I try and transition around 2 to 3 months of my patients. What kind of timeframes do you look at personally?
So roughly the same. So I implement a protocol of, it's an 8-week course that I run. It's available on the school group, which you're part of.
How do people find that?
So that is, I'll give you a link to pop into this. It's under
we'll put that in the description.
Yeah, you can search for us in school with a low carb ketogenic group.
And it's school SKOOL.
Spot on.
For those that don't know what that website is.
If you visit any of my socials, there's a link tree and it's available on there. A fantastic group. This course is available in there. It's an 8-week course and I do run it locally, also in person. But we start with these changes. Restricting carbohydrate doesn't come in till week 4.
Yeah.
So it's re-educating people in regards to these other responses prior to this. So it's 8 weeks, but they're still consuming vegetables at this point. It's after that, we teach them basically the importance potentially of removing certain vegetables, especially if they suffer with certain problems. So if we work with someone who suffers with arthritic pains, then we remove oxalates. Spinach, for example, will go, but we'll allow them to still consume certain plant compounds. Now, some people will live this way for the rest of their life. They will never gravitate into being carnivore. And I get shot down quite often on social media because I'm a strict carnivore.
Yeah.
Yet I sell low carb products.
Yeah.
I offer low carb products. People don't realize that not everybody can make this transition very quickly.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. And any movement towards being low carb ketogenic is going to confer a benefit. It's going to be positive. If someone were to live a dirty keto lifestyle, that is still going to be way more beneficial than living a standard lifestyle. Yeah. I don't recommend that. I'll always recommend happily, what I believe to be the healthiest way to live.
It's occasionally I will get not necessarily shot down, but questioned, shall we say, because I always say, look, eating food is the best thing. But then I have protein powder, and I say, well, what? You're a hypocrite then. I say, no, because I travel all around the world all the time. Every month I'm probably in an average of 2 to 3 countries on an average month. Sometimes it's in time zones where I'm awake and everyone's asleep. All I've got at that point is McDonald's. I'd rather have a protein powder than a Big Mac at that time. And that's the relativity. And so I get that. And I think, the low carb products you sell, yes, it's not carnivore, but it's better than having a Big Mac. So why not?
I agree. I make protein powder.
Yeah.
I don't consume it very often anymore.
Yeah.
Because unlike yourself, I don't have to travel, very far. So I've traveled up to London to see you today. I've brought lots of cooked meats. So like I've cooked a massive steak, I've chopped it up, and that's what I consumed yesterday. In the hotel, I ordered burgers.
Yeah.
So burger patties. So it was like 4 burger patties that I ordered without the breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
And so people may think this is incredibly limited, but
you may do. It's the best with what you can, and it's at the end of the day, your health is in your hands, and people can criticize you or compliment you, but what makes you happy and what makes you comfortable in terms of decision is most important. And I have patients who don't want to go as far as I do in carnivore. That's fine, but they still end up healthier than they were before, and they're happy to accept the negative consequences of having ketchup with their burger patty, or once a week having an ice cream with their kids so they can enjoy something together. There's nothing wrong with that.
100%.
And that's better than the standard Western diet.
Yeah.
Even in terms of, you mentioned earlier about the anxiety that people suffer, which is much more common nowadays. I find that people who do have these occasional things outside of the carnivore diet, like having ice cream with their kids now and again, because they're still so much further down the carnivore road than before, I find that anxiety goes quite a lot. Yeah. And I'm guessing that's the same for you as someone who has said quite openly that, you had quite bad anxiety.
Yeah, for sure. It's, if we look at what causes these things, we look at the neurotransmitters. But just circling back to what you said about, these other compounds, I indulge now and again with protein powder and some Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt was deemed not to be carnivore.
Yeah.
But once a month, I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
It doesn't cause me any problems. I'm in a different position to the average person. And to be honest, Greek yogurt is one of the better things that you can consume.
Yeah.
I mix the powder in there and I think it's absolutely incredible. If that is the least, although if that's the most I need to worry about, then
you're good.
You've got nothing to worry about, But there's certainly places for these compounds, and I think consistency is key. Consistency is key, and you need to be able to live your life and to be able to spend time with your family and so on and so forth. So these things are important. But neurotransmitters, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, melatonin, all of these things allow us to feel the way that we do. Dopamine and serotonin in particular. Dopamine and serotonin, these are pathways that we are hardwired to chase. So it's embedded deep inside us. So we need to elicit these responses. Now, the way that we produce these neurotransmitters, or the catecholamines, is through the conversion of certain amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine, into the neurotransmitters. Well, that's brilliant. But we need cofactors in order to bake the cake or fry the steak. Let's use fry the steak. So in order to convert these aromatic amino acids into the neurotransmitters, we need things like zinc, iron, magnesium, vitamin B6, vitamin B3, vitamin B12. Cofactors. Other ingredients, and to allow us to achieve this goal. Now, we've already said that when we consume a standard diet, these compounds contain things like lectins and phytic acids and other compounds that block the absorption of many of these nutrients. Phytic acid, we mentioned earlier, blocks the absorption of zinc, iron, and magnesium by as much as 100%. So it isn't enough just to consume a little piece of animal protein that contains these aromatic amino acids. What you co-consume with it has a massive impact on how these neurotransmitters are produced. So if we were to consume a piece of beef with a plate of pasta or potato, then that is going to have a massive impact on the body's ability to create these neurotransmitters. So when they're not being created, remember, we're hardwired to chase these. So we begin to eat compounds or chase other elicitations of said neurotransmitter. Now, when we consume sugar, this elicits a dopamine response, for example, and serotonin. I'll explain the mechanisms as we go, but dopamine is released when we consume sugar. And every time we do so, it downregulates that receptor, which means the more we do it, the less the response. So this response is short-lived. It also blocks the prefrontal cortex in the brain, our brain's part of the brain that makes us make sensible decisions. Basically, are we allowed to swear on the show?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So basically, it's the part of the brain that stops us from doing dumb shit.
Yeah.
So
go for it. Yeah, it's fine.
So let's say that how it is. So the more we consume sugar, the more we want it.
Yeah.
So basically, we will wake early hours of the morning and raid the cupboard with all the chocolate bars, or we'll jump into the car and drive to the garage or to McDonald's and so on and so forth. So we're stuck in this cycle. Because we're no longer producing them naturally, we're stuck in this cycle. Now, whenever we consume sugar, it elicits an insulin response. Now, insulin will pull all of the amino acids out of circulation except for tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is one of the amino acids that we need to produce serotonin, leaving tryptophan available for synthesis into serotonin, which means we have a serotonin spike. Well, that's brilliant. It's the reward pathway that makes us feel good. But we can only do this then via the same process as in consuming more sugar. So we're stuck in this circle, and our diet is heavily laden with sugar compounds, carbohydrates. We're constantly eliciting these reward pathways and crashing and down-regulating our body's ability to do this all the time.
It's an addiction.
It's an addiction. The more we do it, the more of this down-regulation, so the more we need to do it, and we're constantly spiking and crashing. This is when you eat, when you eat your favorite chocolate bar, you get this response, you feel fantastic, and then when you're finished, you feel really upset and down with yourself. So the key to this, one, is recognizing that. And then we need to look at what we can do to stop this cycle. How do we break the cycle? Well, we know that we need these amino acids, which are found in animal proteins. We know that we need to convert into these neurotransmitters. So now we know we need to remove the compounds that are blocking the cofactors. So that's the grains, the breads, pastas, rice, so on and so forth. Vegetable compounds if you can. Now we're able to make that. But we've got another problem. Because it takes time for us to do this, we still have sugar cravings. We're still craving sugar. So we're up against this constant barrage. Everywhere we go, we are hit with signs of sugary treats and burgers and whatever, your drug of choice is. So it's incredibly difficult to overcome this. But what we can do is we need to upregulate the body's ability to create certain pathways. So cholecystokinin is one. This will allow us to become satisfied quicker. So it aids with...
it's an incretin hormone, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah.
So it will allow us to combat these urges. And we can do this through a number of ways. We can do it through amino acids, saturated fats, ketones. Basically, everything, omega-3s, all of these compounds are found in meat. So we've put meat back in. So now we need to do that to elicit the cholecystokinin response. Melanocyte-stimulated hormone, which is activated through UVA through the eyes. So it means going out early in the morning, later in the day when the sun is lower in the sky to activate this. So we need to have, the sunglasses off. This will elicit the melanocyte-stimulated hormone response, which will help us to do, a similar thing, basically. It allows us to combat these cravings. Other things that can elicit that response, saturated fats and omega-3s and animal proteins.
Yeah.
I think glutamine will also activate one of those pathways. I can't remember if it's CCK or if it's MSH, but glutamine and amino acids, you could supplement with glutamine. BDNF will help us with inhibition, so our inhibitory control. That is elicited through saturated fats and omega-3s and a ketogenic state. So when we realize that eating the meat is the way to produce the neurotransmitters and to break the cycle, to block the cravings and the sugar addiction, then we can start to recognize that there's a problem and we can start to put things in place in order to do that. Unless we understand that mechanism and understand that we need to consume these compounds in order to produce those neurotransmitters and break the cycle, then we're just stuck in this endless circle of addiction. And this is how we break that addiction. And then now we create the neurotransmitters. Now I no longer suffer with anxiety. I no longer suffer with depression. I still get anxious, but I think it's a normal human response. And I think my response now is in a natural level, if you like. Again, coming back to what we mentioned with insulin and cortisol, these are things that are natural and we need, said responses. I wouldn't be here today if I still suffered with severe anxiety. I wouldn't have had the confidence to drive up. I wouldn't have had the confidence, to meet you at the hotel. You kindly came to pick me up, which is fantastic. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All of these things, the thought of driving into London and booking a hotel and do it. That would have been enough to have crippled me, and it probably would have caused a migraine.
Wow.
And I'm here now, speaking with you, and enjoying every minute of it. So it's
I think people really underestimate how much diet plays a role in mental health and things like anxiety specifically. And it's interesting to hear that you're completely okay. Well, I don't know if there's anything else that triggers it, but in this context at least, you're completely here. I don't think because of medication or anything like that, but purely because of the diet changes that you've made. Have you ever heard of someone called Georgia Eads?
Yeah, I know Georgia.
Yeah, I think if anyone is interested in the role of diet and anxiety, I'm sure you'd agree, a great person to look into. She's got a great book out, I think, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
Thoroughly recommend that if you can get that. We've got a little bit of time left. I want to talk about the UK's first ever Carnivore Conference, because I know we talked about this off camera. When you look at the sphere of carnivore and you look at all the major players in there, the ones that people have majorly heard of, we've got Sean Baker, Anthony Chaffee, Bart Kay, etc., Joe Rogan, etc. It's all outside of the UK. We have not too much in the UK. I think, our claim to fame is probably people like Jane Buxton, for instance. Things like even Tim Noakes has moved to the US, I believe. I don't know if he's still there. Talk to me about what this conference is and when specifically it is as well.
Fantastic. Well, first and foremost, you have kindly agreed to be a speaker there, so I cannot wait for that. This is the UK's first Carnivore Conference, and the idea behind it is to educate people in regards to the healthy lifestyle, the healthy way of living. I'm part of many organizations, and I feel that many of these other organizations, and I don't mean this in a negative way to these organizations, but I think they pussyfoot around real health because they're trying to open it up to the masses.
They're trying to appeal.
To appeal. So it's easier to say, and we've just said it, eat a piece of meat. If you need veg, is fine, as long as you're making progress. But very few are actually saying, well, look, this is the key. If you want to be the healthiest and fittest that you can ever be, this is the lifestyle you need to follow, a carnivore-based lifestyle. Very few people are teaching others why this is the case. And as you rightly say, this is predominated from America. So there are very few influencers within the UK. So what we're trying to do is to build an event full of UK nutrition experts and with people who have suffered with severe issues and overcome these problems through a carnivore-based lifestyle. People who can teach others, people who have walked the walk. And the event is a 2-day event. It's on the 14th and 15th of September in the stunning location of Cliff College in the Peak District, surrounded by beautiful countryside. It's all enclosed. There's accommodation included, which is all in with the hotel and the grounds. It's a 2-day event, and it gives the attendees the opportunity to come to the event, to listen to the speakers, pass on words of wisdom, mingle with the speakers, and get expert pieces of advice in order to make changes. One of the prerequisites of the talk, the speakers, is at the end of the talk, I've given you this fantastic talk. That's absolutely brilliant. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to me? Well, this is what it means to you. It means if you go away and do this, 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 and this, you're going to be healthier and fitter. This will confer a benefit for you. And that's one of the biggest things I think a lot of these places are not doing. You go to these places, they have amazing world-class speakers, and you think that talk was brilliant. But what does it mean for me? What are my takeaways? And that's what we're doing differently. So we're trying to build a community, a tribe, if you like. And we're trying to build the movement within the UK and re-educate people, and hopefully it'll be paid forward. If we can educate one person, then it's the ripple effect. Throwing that pebble into the pond, that ripple will transition out and will affect others along the way. And hopefully next year, we can build the tribe bigger and bigger. But it's to educate ultimately.
And could you give us an idea of some of the speakers that we've got?
Yes. So there's myself. That's the easy one to remember. There's Dr. Abs. Have you heard of him?
No.
So he's pretty good as well. We've got Stephen Thomas. who I co-host the show with on Sundays.
Stephen's coming on the podcast in probably a few weeks' time.
Fantastic. Look forward to that one. Stephen's brilliant. We've got the incredible Phil Escott, Ben Hunt. We have, who else is there? Carnivore Muscle. So that's Jonathan Griffiths. Heather, I think, is coming on. Who else? There may be a couple of others also, but it's, every one of us has lived a lifestyle. We all have different stories to offer. We've all benefited immensely. And, I think it's safe to say that in one form or another, we're all experts within this field. And, I would argue that our information and knowledge is equal to, anybody in the States.
I don't think there's many, to use your word, influencers, carnivore influencers, very few come to mind who really, really understand biochemical pathways and the interaction of different molecules from a chemical perspective. For me, people like yourself and Bart Kay come to mind. There's not that many more outside of that, I would say. And I think it'll be really interesting to get a conference where we can actually go into things like this. Is there any particular resources that you have used to learn the knowledge that you have in this carnivore perspective of these pathways that you've spoken about today?
Yeah, look, let's put this out there. I mentioned this to you recently. I feel like a fraud.
So do I.
But, every time you and I speak on or off the air, your knowledge in regards to these pathways is next level.
Thank you. And yourself, of course.
But I don't think so. It's, I feel like a fraud because the more that I try to study and learn, the more I realize I don't know. And I think what we have, the issue that we have is that we are trying to learn so much. The world of nutrition covers so many different aspects. If we look at it from a doctor's perspective, there's specialists in every area to do with the human body.
Yeah.
We need to have some understanding in regards to every one of these aspects in order to hold a conversation with an expert in that one field. The standard experts, and there are people who are on our wavelength who are enlightened, if you like, who understand these things. But many traditional doctors who are trainers in certain fields will argue that protein is damaging to the body, causes cancer, cholesterol is damaging,
colon cancer, kidney damage,
so on and so forth. And it's trying to, and you and I talk to these doctors, we present to these people. So we need to have a depth of knowledge which goes beyond the standard, if you like. And I find it fascinating. I know that A gets me to B, or A gets me to C even. I want to know the B. It's doing this, does this, but I want to know. And I want to know at a level as deep as I can. So I retrained as a nutritionist, and beyond that, I started to study, my own body to begin with. Well, I was doing these things. It was having this result. Why is my body reacting this way when all of the papers say that it's meant to be this way? So I started to learn to read as best I could clinical trials and research papers, and learned that there were different types. Many were epidemiology studies, which are nothing more than questionnaire type studies.
Yeah.
So I started to
known as a waste of time.
Waste of time studies. Yeah. I like it. Yeah. We need to coin that, waste of time studies. And then we've got, the double blind randomized control trials, which are like the creme de la creme.
Yeah.
And understanding that the title doesn't always
accurately reflect what you can take away from the paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and this will shock many people, but this is 100% true. That title quite often does not reflect what is written within that study. So you need to have some sort of knowledge to be able to go through that. And it was just a case of I was going through, coming across words that I didn't understand. I'd search them, work out. So many of this I'd learned before any qualification. I've recently done at a very low level, like molecular biochemistry, and at an incredibly low level. But even at that level, this is well higher than any other nutritionist has probably gone.
Oh, yeah.
But bloods, I've also, so I've recently qualified in clinical blood analysis.
Nice.
Which is, that's opened up a whole other section of understanding mechanisms, that happen within the body. But look, it's incredibly difficult because it's easy to say hit these these studies, look at these clinical trials, follow this person. For every one of these papers that we look at, every one of these influencers that we follow, there's going to be 10 more that are going to say the opposite.
Yeah.
And in there lies the problem, because we're up against it already. The difference is that you and I have achieved some incredible things through living this lifestyle. I'm my own experiment. You are yours. All of these other people that we've worked with have achieved incredible things. That's data.
Yeah.
That's incredible data. I've witnessed firsthand people reversing diabetes myself.
Yeah.
Chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety. I've seen them reverse, so-called arthritis, polycystic kidney disease.
Yeah.
Advanced polycystic kidney disease, which we're told is irreversible. Cancer.
Yeah.
Cancer, when you understand the mechanism behind what causes cancer.
It's not what people think.
It's not. Everything comes back to diet.
Always.
It comes back. So
you are what you eat, I think, is a famous phrase, and I think it's so true. But I agree with you in terms of the papers are an issue, because the titles, you can't just read a title. Some people go a bit further and read the abstract. The abstract is what the author or authors want you to think without reading that paper, essentially. And I've had comments on videos where I may have talked about a certain vitamin or a nutrient or something in the video, and then someone will disagree and they'll post a link to a paper. And occasionally I will actually click on these and I'll have a look. And I just think, you haven't read this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be posting it as a comment, because it does nothing to back up your claim. Because I don't understand how to interpret data, how to interpret statistics. And sadly, there's no way around that. And people talk about democratizing science and putting it in the hands of the layperson. This is controversial, but you can't. You can put papers in the hands of the layperson. They have no idea how to interpret whether it's worth listening to or not. When there's debate amongst professionals in the same question, how can a layperson do that as well? So I agree. And, hopefully in this conference, we can shift that and be the translation mechanism for those sorts of things. Are there any particular books that you recommend for people who are interested in going carnivore, wanting to learn more about it at all?
So Stephen has a number of books available through his store.
Stephen Thomas,
yeah. So check those out. He has a number of ebooks. For me, the best way I learn is through video. So YouTube is a fantastic source. There's some incredible influences out there. You've named many of them. I'm a big supporter of Dr. Chafee, Sean Baker, Professor Noakes. Your channel is fantastic. Stevens, there's the Carnivore Team GB guys. Phil, Ben, and Johnson all post some incredible content. That's how I tend to learn best. As far as books, I did read the Carnivore Code when it first came out with Paul Saladino.
Yeah.
And, I've looked into many of the papers he's referenced there, and I think he had it right. Had.
That's a debate for another day.
I think he's lost his way a little bit, bless him. But, I think he had it right then. And I don't think he ever gave it long enough to be carnivore. But the references that he's made in there with a lot of these pathways is fantastic. It's one of these things that you can go back to and read again. And obviously, support my channel.
Of course. And it is called...
It's Keto Pro.
The Keto Pro.
So, I should change the name really, because I don't teach keto anymore. I teach healthy living. And it just happens that being in the metabolic state of ketosis is the healthiest way to live.
Yeah.
At least I believe. But my followers are incredibly low, and I think some of the content that we've put out, I've had some amazing guests on. I'm going to get you on.
Thank you.
So it's going to be even better.
You've had Anthony Chafee on.
We've had Chafee. I've been on Chafee's channel. Yeah. I've been on Sean Baker's channel. We've had Bart K.
Yeah. What a legend Bart K is, by the way. I'm a big fan.
Bart K is brilliant. I need to get him back on also. But look, it's, be your own experiment. Listen to it. In fact, don't believe what I am telling you. Don't believe what Dr. Labs is telling you.
Yeah.
Listen to that information. Go away and do your own research.
No one can tell you your blood glucose is high or low when you've got an actual CGM reading telling you exactly what it is. And I think that's the principle. You can't, if your doctor says doing XYZ makes you feel bad, but you do XYZ and your condition goes away, you've got to stop taking things for granted, I think. And that's the crux of it, in my opinion.
100%.
If people wanted to get in touch with you in terms of the coaching to help them go carnivore, what's the best way to do it?
Fantastic. So any of my social, keto_pro is the one that Keto Pro is active on. Richard Smith Nutrition is also available on Instagram, Keto Pro on YouTube. My website is theketopro.com. Through any one of these mechanisms, on social, you'll find a link to Linktree, and the consultation is one of the top ones on there. You'll also find a link to the Carnivore Conference.
Yep.
You'll find links to the YouTube channel. It's the one-stop shop for everything, but quite easy to find. I don't think you'll have any difficulty finding.
And for the conference, what are we looking at for ticket prices for people?
So there are a number of different options. So $299, I believe, is the standard price. This includes a night's accommodation, 2 days at the event, food included. So that's a fantastic opportunity there. In fact, is it $199? It might be for one person. $299, I think, or $259 potentially. We'll have to get these in right.
He's still rehearsing, as you can tell.
It's, the price inside, I've let down. I've left to Ben. Ben is the guy on the prices, but we've had a discussion with this, and we've gone through, and we're trying to offer. We don't make anything off the food. We're not. To be honest, the event will probably run as we were speaking on the radio. It'll probably run at a loss, but that's not what it's about for us. It's about getting our word out and spreading. It may seem expensive, but I promise you this price is an absolute bargain. The double rooms and single available. I know that what isn't listed on the website is a single day ticket. So if there's a speaker in particular that you want to come along to without accommodation, you can reach out to myself or through Carnivore Conference, which is another page on Instagram that you can reach out to, which is available from Carnivore Conference UK. If you go to the search engine and search for Carnivore Conference that way. Message any one of us and we can do a day ticket for £99. But there's lots of different structures in regards to pricing. So it's I'm sure $199 is 2 days actually. I think $259 is for a couple, for example, to share a twin room. But it's a fantastic event. I'm super excited. I really can't wait. There's some incredible speakers and it's going to be unlike anything else. And who wouldn't want to be at the first?
Yeah, exactly. Can you give us a quick idea of topics of talks if you know that already?
So, mine is going to be on plant compounds and how much it takes to kill you. So plants can kill you.
Yeah.
So, we've mentioned a number of compounds today, and that's all well and good, but how much of said compound is going to cause a problem? How much is going to kill? So that's what my talk's going to be about. We've got Lee Cooper, so I forgot to mention, he's coming on straight after me. Lee's got an incredible story. He's
coming on the podcast, actually.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Fantastic bloke, Lee. I've got all the time in the world for Lee.
Kent Carnivore is his channel on YouTube.
Spot on. So Lee's coming on straight after me. So I'm basically saying about how these compounds can cause harm, and then Lee's coming off to say how they did cause harm.
Yeah, that's a good follow-up, actually, yeah.
We've got Steve coming on. Steve's, I can't remember what Steve's decided to speak on. We've got
which Steve is this?
Steve Thomas.
Steve Thomas, okay.
So expert in bloods, but I think he's going to go into detail in regards to a number of things. We've got, what have we got? We've got...
Mine's on carnivore perspective on longevity.
Perfect. Longevity, which is super interesting. Jonathan, Carnivore Muscle, is doing some form of training in regards to living a carnivore lifestyle. But there's lots going on. There's going to be lots and lots of information, lots of time to mingle.
Yeah. And people can take away the sort of presentations, I think, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we're going to give the presentations so everybody can have those by email. So they can, so you won't have to take a picture. You can take pictures if you like. In fact, we recommend you take pictures and plaster social media. But it's take as many pictures as you want, but everything will be sent on to every customer so they can go back and look at all of the information. But I think it's going to pave the way for a different way of thinking moving forward. And everyone is going to want to be at the first one.
Yeah. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Richard Smith, thank you very much for coming on down. I'm sure we will see you again. I hope we see you again. for even more discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. Thank you.
Welcome.